In this video, you will see how an ordinary girl suddenly finds herself in another world and instead of fighting monsters, opens a cozy cafe for knights, magicians, and even demons. But soon her coffee becomes more dangerous than any spell, and the guests begin to fight not for food, but for her heart. Every new day brings secrets, intrigues, and feelings she didn't expect. Watch to the end. The ending of this story will turn everything you thought about a quiet life in Isekai upside down. Zeke stopped suddenly, catching a glint of light in the direction of the Kukuri forest. His companion suggested they investigate the source of the glow, as dawn was approaching. However, he added that if it was related to magic, the matter might be beyond their jurisdiction. At that moment, deep in the forest, a girl lay unconscious. Lightning struck nearby, and somewhere in the depths of her memory, a feeling flashed as if something important had just happened. The story then shifts to a busy cafe, where a cheerful waitress, smiling, prepares to enjoy lunch, anticipating the first bite of her dish. Two girls chatted about everyday matters at a nearby table. One of them jokingly praised Risa's bento and complained about being lonely. Risa agreed, after which her friend handed her some sweets, declaring it was time for dessert, and Risa thanked her warmly. While Kageyama noted that the sweets had turned out poorly, and the hard water had ruined the taste of the green tea, the others listened with smiles, thanking him for his efforts and for the care he'd taken of them. Afterwards, Risa, a 22-year-old office worker, examined the beautifully packaged delicacy and thought with a touch of envy about her colleague who had gone abroad. She longed to embark on a culinary journey of her own, somewhere where they served exquisite food. Later, she woke up, surprised to see the moon in the window, and quietly muttered words of bewilderment, as if she didn't realize how much time had passed since her last memory. Meanwhile, the little girl standing nearby cried out in joy when she saw that the one lying down had finally opened her eyes, expressing genuine relief and joy. The next second, she recoiled in fear. A character spoke before her, as if straight out of a fairy tale. The small creature apologized for the fright, and the confused girl tried to comprehend where she was and what was happening. Gradually, a tiny, shining creature appeared before her. It introduced itself as the spirit of the world, explaining that it served as a natural intermediary between humans and the goddess. The short-haired girl listened silently, hesitant to intervene. Afterwards, another figure, dressed in a light dress, tried to convince the man next to her not to escape reality. He insisted he was simply tired, describing his usual evening, but she firmly declared that everything that was happening was a dream. Then the creature with the pointed ears bowed its head in apology, explaining that its presence in this world was necessary. In response, the man, confused and covered in a cold sweat, thought that an invitation from another world sounded more like an abduction. He still doubted whether such tiny creatures actually existed. Meanwhile, the spirit asked to be taken home, as she was left in her pajamas, and then offered to at least listen to her before making any decisions. The girl with long dark hair apologized sincerely, while the other explained that the transition between dimensions was a path of no return, capable of upsetting the balance of the world and leading to the destruction of civilization. The spirit then warned him that he would no longer be able to return. The man, caught between sleep and reality, tried to maintain his sanity, preventing the nightmare from completely consuming his consciousness. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a young woman lay on a soft bed. Voices around her assured her that she was fine, just tired, not suffering from transference sickness, so she simply needed to rest. A quiet shadow at the head of the bed watched intently. Soon she jerked awake, looking around anxiously and clutching the blanket. Her lips trembled as she whispered, asking where she was and what had happened to her. Then the young man standing nearby sighed with relief, glad that the victim's condition was better than expected. Across the room, a woman sat at a table, visibly nervous, and the silent girl whispered where she lived. After this, the rescued woman suddenly rushed toward the man, hugging him tightly. Her words expressed immense relief, as she had seriously feared he would never wake up, and he was only confusedly trying to understand who was so worried about him. Finally, he thought with concern about the girl left alone in the forest. Then the dark-haired woman introduced herself as Kirikawa Risa, explaining that she was simply relieved, while the blonde woman listened attentively, trying to comprehend the entire chain of events. Guilford Hyde Claude introduced himself as the owner of the estate and then introduced Risa to his wife, Anastasia. The woman greeted her guest with a kind smile and gently suggested she address her simply as Tasha. The girl, still sitting on the bed, politely apologized for disturbing her. However, the man and woman standing nearby asked her to thank the spirit, not them, for it was he who had cared for her while she was unconscious. Guilford then explained that a patrol of knights had reported a strange flash of light, and he, as the court mage, had gone to investigate the source. When he arrived, the stranger was already there, glowing with a soft light, a sign of her passage from another world. Later, he spoke soothingly to his worried companion, assuring her that she could stay with him since she didn't have a home of her own. However, he sadly admitted that he didn't yet know how to win her back. He then remarked that their meeting probably had divine meaning, but the blonde next to him gently corrected him. Meanwhile, the dark-haired girl assured the blonde that she was completely healthy and could eat without any problems, while another participant in the scene thought the guy simply couldn't abandon a girl in need. Risa pondered her transport to an unfamiliar world, perceiving it as fate, but was glad to be among kind people. Two maids approached and informed her that she could use the wardrobe and call them when she was ready. After a while, the guest cautiously asked her hostess if she was angry with her. She calmly replied that the goddess who had brought her there was to blame for everything, and then thanked her, much to the girl's genuine surprise. Afterwards, Risa asked how she should address her new acquaintance. She seemed slightly embarrassed, apologized for bothering her, and admitted she didn't have a name at all, which struck her as extremely awkward. The dark-haired woman suggested calling the elf Basil, to which she happily agreed and promised to help as much as she could. Then Risa wondered why Guilford was addressed as master, as if he held an important position. Later, a woman with long hair admired a lace dress, and a woman standing nearby explained that Tasha owned a clothing company. Hearing this, a man sitting nearby responded approvingly, clearly impressed by the fact. Then Guilford suggested the girl not to be shy and try the modest dish. She happily agreed, and he added that the food resembled light rice porridge with milk, good for the stomach. The girl hesitantly took a spoon and sampled a bit, then invited the others to do the same. One of the women complimented her appetite, while Risa, unable to recognize the taste, tried to identify the ingredients, feeling increasingly confused. Suddenly, she put down her spoon and turned away from the table, noticing that she could no longer eat. The others exchanged glances, astonished by such a sudden change. After this, Miru, having somewhat adjusted to the new world, began to compare it to Japan. She decided to study hard at the Claude household and offered to help with anything the owners needed. The story then shifts to a quiet town surrounded by mountains and dense forests. Here, people lived side by side with spirits, and magic completely replaced gas and electricity in everyday life. Next, we see the kingdom of Philipormia, rich in natural resources. Its inhabitants used magical tools extensively, and, surprisingly, their standard of living was almost identical to that of modern humans. The explanatory panel mentioned that mages like Mr. Guilford serve in the Department of Magic. They form contracts with spirits, giving them names, and can cast spells without any artifacts. Risa was surprised to realize how quickly she was progressing in her studies. She'd mused that most people couldn't see spirits, but words conveyed the essence well, though writing was more difficult, so she studied it diligently. One of the maids gently suggested to Mistress Risa that it was time for a break. At the same moment, another character announced with a smile that lunch was ready, as usual disrupting her good intentions to study. Risa sighed and agreed, looking at the hard bread in front of her. Someone nearby was trying unsuccessfully to break it, muttering in bewilderment that the loaf was so hard it felt like it was made of stone. The girl grimaced with displeasure, wondering whether she should dip her food into the soup to somehow improve the flavor. Then the scene shifted to a close-up. On the table sat an oily salad, rock-hard bread, oversalted broth, and a piece of meat that had clearly suffered from culinary experiments. The man sat, frowning, thinking about how the goddess had torn him from his familiar life and deprived him of even simple joys. At that moment, someone quietly offered to listen to him if something was troubling his soul. Then the girl couldn't stand it any longer and loudly exclaimed that all the local food was simply disgusting, finally reaching the limit of her patience. A later account noted that a week later, she decided to try the dishes of this world again, this time at the evening meal. Meanwhile, the short-haired one thoughtfully asked about spirits, and the cheerful blonde recalled a European belief about leaving sweets for brownies. After that, she asked if Basil accepted food from people, much to the tiny fairy's surprise. The girl cautiously asked if this was all a punishment, and the boy apologetically explained that sweets simply didn't exist in their world. Hearing this, she suddenly sat up in shock, unable to believe her ears. The man and woman exchanged glances, concerned about the reaction at the table. Then the young woman in the dark dress awkwardly admitted she'd said too much, creating an awkward tension in the room. He tried to smooth things over, noting that this was, after all, a completely different world. She, however, admitted that she simply hadn't yet gotten used to the local customs. At that moment, two masked servants apologized for any missteps they'd made during dinner. After this, Guilford asked what kind of food there was in her world. She clarified that she was speaking not about the world, but about her country, and described in detail the main dishes: rice, noodles, seasonings like miso and soy sauce, and sweets. The two listeners looked on with genuine curiosity and slight bewilderment. Then she confidently declared that she would cook the food herself tomorrow at the Claude estate. The maid nervously agreed to borrow the kitchen, and the others exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect, doubtful, but interested. Later, he reflected on his words, finding them too bold and shameless, and wondered if he'd gone too far. The girl looked at him in surprise, as if she couldn't believe those words had come from him. The woman excitedly told Gil she'd heard of otherworldly dishes, sparking his excitement. Mary, meanwhile, silently recalled that these people always showed an interest in the unusual. Meanwhile, the maid apologized for her sudden appearance and promised to notify the head maid about tomorrow's menu. Then one of the girls asked in bewilderment what this whole conversation was about, but the other, smiling, confidently replied that this was the best way to exchange culture and everyone would certainly appreciate her culinary talent. Later, Risa reflected on the years past, when she lived alone and cooked exclusively for herself. Now, she wanted to create the best dish for everyone who had shown her kindness and care. Miru was hesitant to cook anything using local ingredients. Fina explained that making yeast would take several days, and they had never heard of rice. Elsa then added that the goddess had mentioned similar ingredients. The girl explained that she was the spirit of plants and wind, and therefore knew a lot about herbs, wheat, and grains. At that moment, someone suddenly realized what was missing and shouted loudly for the required product to be brought quickly. The next morning, Fina cheerfully announced that breakfast would be pasta. A tiny, animated doll floated beside her, adding a touch of magic to the scene. The maids were surprised by the word pasta itself, but one quickly explained that it was a type of noodle made from flour, eggs, and salt, adding that it wouldn't be difficult to remember the recipe. Two girls noticed that there were only a few ingredients, but one with a scythe quickly apologized and assured that there were huge reserves in the warehouse of the Claude estate, so there was no need to worry. After that, Miru got down to business. She showed how to form a mound of flour, then make a depression at the top and carefully pour the eggs in. She smiled and compared the process to an eruption of lava. Mary laughed softly, watching the scene, while the others froze in surprise. One girl noted with alarm that her flour had exploded, but the other calmly replied that they would mix it all up anyway and it would turn out even better. 61. Fina explained in detail how to knead the dough properly, demonstrating every step, while Mira struggled with her sticky hands. The older woman encouraged her, saying it was a normal feeling, as that's how good dough is made. 62. After this, Miru told everyone to cover the kneaded dough with a damp towel and let it rest. The others looked at each other in surprise, not believing that dough left undisturbed could become edible. 63. The girl handed over the pre-prepared ingredients and asked how to use them. Fina suggested making the sauce in the meantime, and several of the maids noted with interest that letting the dough rest would make it softer and more elastic. 64. Soon, one of the girls excitedly showed the host a huge vegetable called mallow. Someone tried a piece and remarked that it looked like eggplant, but tasted more like tomato, with a slight sweetness. A third person added that the plant resembled a local variety of spinach. 65. After some discussion, they decided to take a chance and use a new ingredient. One of the participants explained that the meat came from a bird called Toto, whose eggs are used to prepare dishes for holidays. 20 minutes later, the finished dish was shining on the table. 66. Meanwhile, Fina demonstrated how to roll the dough into a thin square before cutting it. She asked if anyone had a serrated knife, like a pie roller, to the surprise of her assistants. One of the girls enthusiastically held out a knife with a serrated blade, but the other gently declined. Then the two cooks explained how to cut the dough into squares and pinch the center to create a butterfly shape, the original farfalle pasta with its scalloped edges. The three maids laughed at their creations, and the woman with long hair declared that she would take care of the sauce, leaving the preparation of the pasta itself to the others. Fina noted with nostalgia that it had been a while since she'd made tomato sauce. Miru, meanwhile, watched in surprise as she poured chunks of fruit into the pot, asking if it wasn't strange, since tomatoes were considered fruits here. She wondered if, in this world, people confused fruits and vegetables. A short time later, Miru joyfully announced that the butterflies were ready, wiping sweat from her brow. She ordered them to be dropped into boiling water and cooked until done, after which someone admiringly praised the work. When the dish was served, everyone froze, admiring the meticulous presentation. Two characters exclaimed in delight, enraptured by the sight and aroma of the mouth-watering pasta. Fina explained that it was farfalle pasta with a sauce made from poultry, solana, and mallow. The others, surprised, assumed the recipe must be from another world and eagerly reached out to try it first. The man bowed his head in gratitude, thanking the goddess and the spirits for the treat. Meanwhile, the cook, a little nervous, wondered if they would like the taste, but the blonde cheerfully declared that everything was simply wonderful. Risa responded shyly to the praise, especially when she was praised for the firmness of the pasta and the delicate sauce. Everyone around her happily commented on how delicious the dish was, and one of the girls suggested she try it herself while it was still warm, thanking everyone for their help. Fina marveled at how simple tomato paste could be so delicious and memorable. Nearby, a man and woman watched the merriment, delighted as everyone ate with gusto, filling the house with laughter and warmth. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, two maids were busy baking cookies. One of them remarked that cooking was a way for hearts to exchange. Soon, the man invited Miss Mary to join him, and she gratefully accepted. Kageyama and Fina discussed how food brings people together, and Lena, smiling, thanked everyone for the delicious lunch and for making this day special for her. Miru, a little tired but focused, recalled the pasta ingredients from a book. The narration noted that the Claude mansion was experiencing a veritable pasta boom. The aroma of noodles could be felt morning, noon, and evening. Later, she happily recounted how she tried making soft bread by fermenting local fruits with yeast. She was delighted that similar products existed in this world, while the other girl wondered if she should look for a local alternative to rice. A few days after the pasta fever broke out at the estate, Risa confidently declared she was going to bake soft bread with the new yeast. Her friend said there was nothing she could do about it, and while the dough was rising, the woman in the hat reminded her that the spirit Basil was nearby and would help if needed, and the baker offered to help at any time. With a cheerful smile, the girl announced she was planning a leisurely stroll around the city. Her confident posture and sparkling eyes betrayed genuine excitement for the new day and the discoveries to come. Outside, she took a deep breath of fresh air, savoring the spaciousness after her long stay inside the mansion. Looking at the majestic, castle-like buildings, she thought that staying indoors was pointless, as a whole unknown world lay before her. Suddenly, the wind blew her wide-brimmed hat off her head, and the girl rushed after it, trying to catch it. The hat stubbornly slipped away, and ahead of her, a tiny magical creature floated smoothly down the cobblestone street, as if leading her somewhere. When they stopped, the conversation quietly turned to the street. Basil thanked her for controlling the wind and deftly caught the flying object, receiving it from the hands of a little girl, who respectfully addressed him as master. Meanwhile, a girl in a dress walked down the cobbled street, holding the rescued hat in her hands. Nearby, two tiny spirits whispered to each other, one perched on a barrel, the other nestled comfortably on a stone ledge. The girl wondered if the area was overrun with spirits, and one of them explained that they found old places especially cozy, so they gathered there. Looking around the alley with its old-world charm, she felt a slight nostalgia, even though she was here for the first time. They soon spotted a building that resembled a shop, with a table inside, suggesting it might be a tavern. However, the companion clarified that it wasn't a restaurant at all, but an old bar, while the other participant remarked that the building looked very pleasant. The girl in the apron explained that the establishment had closed when the manager fell ill, although business had previously been excellent. The woman in the hat listened silently and then asked if she was a neighbor. She nodded and added that it was Silas's shop for magical tools, opening the door. Inside, Angelica introduced herself warmly, jokingly calling herself the jewel of the store and offering to order everything from repairs to making things from scratch. The hat-wearing guest inquired if they made kitchenware there, thought the owner was very welcoming, and, after a warm farewell, moved on. After a stroll, the fox-eared girl felt thirsty and noticed a vendor selling drinks for about 100 yen. She stopped, examining the colorful bottles and remarking that they looked quite appetizing. A nearby guy sampled one of the drinks and frowned, deciding it tasted like a cross between grapefruit and natto. At that moment, a girl hit him with her hat, asking worriedly if he was okay. When he looked up, she froze, struck by his attractive appearance and neat uniform. He noticed her reaction and, slightly surprised, let out a short, thoughtful Suddenly, she dropped the glass, spilling sticky juice all over her dress. The man calmly apologized, admitting his carelessness, and remarked that her clothes, judging by their cut, resembled a maid's uniform. The girl quickly offered to pay for the cleaning, but he politely declined, saying he didn't know local prices and didn't want to cause any trouble. Then she hesitantly suggested something else, arousing his genuine curiosity. Finally, she pulled a cookie from her bag and held it out as an apology. The serious young man silently sampled the treat and thought she was a rather strange woman as she stood at the entrance to the building, bowing repeatedly. Meanwhile, someone at dinner asked what cookies were while everyone else was enjoying the soft, fragrant bread. The host noted with relief that he was glad to see how much everyone enjoyed the food. During the meal, the man asked her if she'd been out for a walk that day. She nodded and said she'd wandered through a number of stalls, browsing the local wares. She soon confessed that she was thinking of finding a job, which greatly surprised the man and woman at the table. They exchanged glances, not expecting such a decisive statement from her. The owners then offered to pay her for helping in the kitchen, but she refused, explaining that she already felt obligated to repay the housing and care provided. She added that now she simply dreams of living peacefully in this world, surrounded by kindness. The girl said that she wanted to find a business in which she could be useful, emphasizing that this was her real path forward and the reason why she stayed. The man enthusiastically declared that Risa's dishes were so unique and delicious that they would definitely be a hit. He added that if she opened her own place, he and his wife would come there every day. Smiling, the woman assured her that she would help in any way she could. Then Risa reflected on her past as an office worker and admitted that she was still learning to write, so she believed that cooking was truly her calling. The woman insisted that opening a cafe was a given, while the man worried about the paperwork and Risa's lack of local citizenship. Despite her desire to remain a regular waitress, he assured her that this wouldn't be an obstacle. She then confidently noted that Risa herself was not opposed to the idea, after which the narrative moved the action to the facade of the building the following morning. The woman happily introduced their adopted daughter, Risa Kurakawa Claude, to those around her, and the girl herself, stunned, cried out in delight and surprise. The man gently reassured his wife, saying there was no reason to worry, as they had no children of their own, and they would be happy if Risa accepted them as a second family. The woman listened, not hiding her genuine surprise. She bowed modestly, thanking him for his concern, and described herself as a rough but willing protégé. The other smiled and remarked that her words sounded like a bride's greeting, and the narrative explained that from that day on, she officially became the owner of the establishment and a legal resident of the city, thanks to the patronage of the House of Claude. After a while, the elderly man warmly greeted the guest, delighted to meet his dear niece and expressing sincere joy that she was now among them. A woman approached, tenderly mentioning Risa's name to make sure she'd remembered it correctly. Another commented with surprise on the adoption, and a third, noticing Alec, greeted him joyfully, calling him brother. The man asked if she had a suitable space in mind. Risa remembered a beautiful building on an old alley and told him about it. He then mentioned that there used to be a bar there and suggested they check it out, which elicited a lively reaction from her. The woman explained that her brother headed a company called Ashley, which deals in everything from food to real estate. He could provide both the premises and the food supplies. Risa immediately thought of the necessary ingredients and asked for rice, to which she was told it was used as livestock feed. The girl happily expressed her gratitude for the opportunity, and Tasha exclaimed excitedly that she couldn't believe she'd finally gotten rice. Another woman cheerfully praised Risa, not quite understanding why it was so significant. The man expressed interest in cooking and asked if she would sell him a couple of recipes. The woman suddenly apologized, and he, not expecting it, looked at her in surprise. Later, one of the men gave Risa some advice: success depends on skill, but without risk, nothing can be achieved. He wished her luck and asked her not to be afraid of mistakes, and she listened attentively, capturing every word. Having received support from Ashley, they discussed renovation plans together, installing a stove, millstones for grinding rice, and decorating the interior. Everything was going smoothly, and one of the women promised to sew uniforms for the staff starting that very day. A few weeks later, Risa, her hair braided long, stood in front of a charming building covered in plants. She smiled, reflecting on how quickly time had flown since it all began. Inside the kitchen, the girl in the waitress's uniform recalled Gil's words about the goddess's will and felt a quiet joy at having opened her own establishment. But at the same time, she began to worry about whether everything was going as planned. A girl with wavy golden hair explained that a goddess had created this world and lived in the land of the gods. Her dark-haired companion thoughtfully asked why the divine being had never appeared before her, despite having brought her here. The cheerful companion replied that the master was here now precisely because the goddess had deemed him indispensable to this world. Her words sounded confident and tinged with joy. Fina then considered the vagueness of the goddess's instructions, doubting whether they were truly allowed to do whatever they pleased. Ultimately, she decided to keep things simple and simply make the onigiri, approaching the matter with a relaxed air of calm. Finally, here's a recipe for crumbly nut cookies: melt the butter and beat it until creamy, add sugar until the mixture turns white, and then gradually whisk in the eggs to prevent the mixture from separating. First, soft flour is sifted into a bowl, then gently mixed with a spatula using chopping motions to avoid overmixing the dough. Then, chopped nuts, almonds, peanuts, and walnuts are evenly added, carefully distributing them throughout the mixture. After this, the oven is preheated to 180 degrees Celsius, and the heroine, turning it on, prepares to bake. The character then explains how to place the dough portions on the parchment paper, cautioning that space should be left between them. He then mentions that the cookies should be baked at 180 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes, and that if you don't have an oven, you can use a toaster. Finally, he shows the golden brown result: nice, crispy cookies. The narrator recalls that just over 2 months had passed since their arrival from Japan to the magical world guarded by a goddess and spirits. However, the first meal after the sudden transfer was so terrible that it remained in their memory for a long time. The character reflects on how the staple diet in this world is hard bread with no seasonings other than salt, sugar, and pepper. She recalls sharing this only with the family who took her in, and decides to use her hobby, cooking, to remedy the situation. Soon, the couple congratulated the cafe owner on the opening, admitting they'd been waiting for her outside. The woman suddenly noticed an insect on her husband's back, and he jumped in surprise, causing everyone to burst into laughter. The waitress presented the day's menu, explaining that the lunch set included salad and soup, and a drink could be added for just 2 reals. The diners exchanged glances, deciding they could have eaten in the mansion, but they'd come here for the atmosphere. She took their orders. One man chose a set with Omurisan signature tea, another an egg and vegetable sandwich, also with the same tea. Both customers looked pleased, if slightly embarrassed by the attention. The girl explained that the main secret of Omuris is speed. She showed how to stretch an egg in a frying pan, layer rice with Toto chicken on top, and quickly roll it into a neat roll. The assistant remarked that this was his first experience serving customers. She responded by saying the soup was already warm enough, and he added that all that was left was to make the sandwiches and bring everything out for serving. Fina happily brought out the first order and announced that the dish was ready. 2 customers complimented her, remarking that the uniform Tasha had made looked beautiful and that she now truly looked like a professional. A woman in a long dress approached the counter and asked for a loaf of bread, like the one in the display case, then added that she wanted both rolls and plain bread. The waitress agreed to slice and place everything in a basket for 35 reals. A woman, probably an escort, stood nearby near the carriage and its driver. She silently watched the proceedings, not interfering. A moment later, a horse-drawn carriage pulled up. The waitress thanked them for their visit, and the young man asked if he could order takeout through the window. She confirmed that only bread and cookies were currently available, and at that moment, she recognized the carriage. A woman with lush curls asked in surprise if they knew each other. The man explained that the girl was his childhood friend and Gil's cousin, adding that he had bragged about her bread, which was why she had come to buy it herself. The girl explained that the country's queen was of noble birth, but was known for her simplicity and avoided formal introductions. These words surprised the young man, as it now became clear that the Claude family was related to the royal line. On the first day of Omusabai Cafe's operation, the heroine sat inside, reflecting on how fate had gifted her with an incredible family. However, she suddenly realized she had completely overlooked one very important customer. The very next morning, a line formed outside the bakery. People were asking about the simple bread and cookies, and the girl wondered if the advertising Tasha had launched the day before was the cause of such a rush. One of the men mentioned a rumor that a royal carriage bearing the coat of arms had stopped in a narrow alley near the shop. The waitress calmly confirmed that family representatives had indeed arrived yesterday. Lena added that bread from this bakery was now served at the royal table, so it would have sold out without any rumors. Another girl nearby quietly asked for another slice. All the bread was sold out almost immediately, and the following days proceeded in much the same way. After the man offered to pay a percentage of the recipe to Ashley, sales began to grow steadily, cementing the cafe's success and recognition. The girl stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding spatulas and anxiously wondering if their establishment was gradually transforming from a cafe into a full-fledged bakery. Despite her tense gaze, her expression betrayed a determination to continue and see the job through. Inside the cafe, a waitress happily noted that the bread was in great demand. However, the manager, with a restrained smile, remarked that without regular customers, revenue wouldn't grow. After all, the people here were accustomed to eating only with drinks. The girl politely apologized, explaining that the cookies were sold out that day. Then the man asked if he could buy some there, and she silently admitted that she barely had time to balance baking with serving guests. The customer recalled recently seeing a colleague enjoying these very cookies and learned they were purchased at her cafe. She confirmed they were all gone, and he, looking serious, admitted he'd like more, which inadvertently surprised her. He thoughtfully explained that the cookies had a strangely balanced flavor, a firm crust but a light texture, sweet with a hint of flavor, and an aftertaste that was impossible to tire of. The girl curiously asked him if he liked sweets. He replied that he hadn't tried enough to judge. Then she suggested they stop by again sometime if they had some free time, and a friend standing nearby smiled and remarked that he seemed to have a weakness for desserts after all. He nodded, promising to come again, and then she brought out some fresh scones for him to sample, asking him to rate them. He politely asked if he could try them, and the girl, a little nervously, said they were sweets and she'd be interested to hear his opinion. She smiled awkwardly, admitting to herself that this type of man was far too attractive. A small spirit nearby whispered that handsome men always remain attractive, no matter what they do. After tasting, the man remarked that the scones weren't as sweet as the cookies, but still had their own charm. He especially liked the filling and added that the dessert went perfectly with tea, while the woman listened attentively, memorizing. He explained that the white stuff was whipped cream and the red stuff was jam, then confessed that he preferred the cream. The girl happily agreed, admitting that she also liked the creamy variety best. At that moment, Kageyama insisted he was already of age, but Silva sharply objected, claiming he was still a minor and 4 years younger than him. Then one of the girls reminded him that in their world, adults are considered adults at 16, which completely confused Kageyama, forcing him to ask who exactly is considered a minor. Later, the young man asked another if he was a local. He replied that he had just arrived. The girl, embarrassed, apologized for her familiarity with the older man, thinking she looked too childish around the locals. She smiled warmly, thanking him for the conversation and apologizing for being too direct. She explained that it was precisely because of her short temper that she hadn't been able to make many friends until now. Zeke calmly introduced himself, saying he served in the city's nightly order and would definitely return to buy cookies after tomorrow's patrol. The girl listened in silence, stunned by his unexpected candor. They sat down at the table, and she promised to bake more so as not to disappoint him. He quietly agreed, and the scene shifted. The narrative showed Risa, the cafe manager, awaiting his next visit with a slight smile. Kageyama calmly said they could make a batch of cookies for tomorrow, since they last a long time, and the work schedule wasn't over yet. Someone asked if the night had arrived, and the scene smoothly transitioned to a quiet night scene outside the cafe. Suddenly, a man with a bottle appeared from the darkness, loudly asking who was in charge and demanding wine. The girl greeted him with a strained smile, wondering if he was drunk or simply fresh off a tough day of work. The man angrily slammed his palm on the bar, demanding a drink. The girl quickly apologized, explaining that this wasn't a tavern. At that moment, another patron anxiously called out to her mistress, fearing the worst. The girl anxiously asked if her mistress was okay. She explained that she had narrowly escaped being hit when a gust of wind from Basil pushed her aside at the last moment, saving her from a deadly spinning attack. The man froze, his face tense and surprised, watching as the girl, trembling, tried to rise to her feet. She knew she needed to run, but her body wouldn't obey, and fear paralyzed her every movement. The girl sheepishly explained that she had received the treat as an apology for staining his uniform. The man calmly replied that he would wash the stain at home, and the man standing next to him reacted with surprise, not expecting such a restrained response. A cheerful young man greeted Zeke, who looked tired after a long morning patrol. Another comrade joked that being the future head of a knightly order was no easy feat, but Zeke dismissed the idea as an exaggeration. Kageyama inquired if their food was truly as delicious as they said. However, the uniformed man explained that it was the standard nightly diet, nutritious but not overly indulgent, as the important thing wasn't taste, but maintaining strength. Then Kageyama advised him not to overwork himself, even if the work was enjoyable. He reflected on how he had previously believed that food was only needed to satisfy hunger, looking at a simple meal with a new appreciation for the value of taste. Suddenly, a man swung a bottle angrily, intending to strike, and the woman, cowering in fear, tried to cover herself. But at that moment, a man in uniform with a sword stood before her, firmly intercepting the blow and shielding her. The girl, recognizing the familiar voice, uttered Zeke's name in surprise. He sternly demanded that the disturbance cease immediately, looking at the offender with cold determination. The attacker cried out in pain as the young man deftly twisted his arm. He explained that they had responded to a call about a drunken, rowdy individual who had managed to escape, prompting a search of the entire area. Zeke apologized for being late and asked if she was hurt. The girl quickly assured him everything was fine, but the other knight exclaimed that he was about to give up, thinking the situation was far more serious. When Zeke was detained, someone joked that his steps were too short, while another countered that he simply ran too fast. Eventually, one of the commanders ordered Reinhard to escort him, to which Zeke protested, demanding that they not abandon him. The man explained that the victim was his friend, which surprised the woman, who hadn't expected a cafe waitress to be in such a predicament. However, she quickly nodded, expressing understanding. The girl gratefully accepted the outstretched hand of a serious young man who helped her up. Someone nearby urged her to leave quickly, reminding her that the drunken hooligan would be of no use anyway. They shook hands, and the conversation gradually shifted to the establishment's history. It turned out that it had once housed a bar, where one of the men had been a regular. Kageyama thoughtfully asked what awaited the violator now. The girl in the waitress uniform replied that he would most likely be fined, as such cases rarely go to court unless there are serious consequences. She added sheepishly that the guilty man's remorse was enough for her, as no serious harm had been done, only a fright. The man advised caution, reminding her that even with good order, it was impossible to handle a case alone without support. He apologized awkwardly, and she quickly assured him she wasn't blaming him. Then he admitted he'd been too careless, even though, living alone in Tokyo, he'd always kept his ears open. The man asked about her family, as she had recently arrived in the capital. The girl quietly replied that she now belonged to the house of Claude. Claude asked when she had arrived in Philiformia and if she was referring to Guilford Claude of the Department of Magic. Risa nodded and explained that he was her stepfather, whom she had only recently met. She cautiously inquired if he had anything to do with the mysterious flash of light that had been reported to the magic department, adding that Supreme Royal Mage Claude had likely arrived on the scene first. She then quietly offered her guest some tea and asked if he would like more, warning him that the conversation might drag on, but asking him to listen carefully to what she was about to tell him. The story ended with a family of 4 children standing outside a country house between the coast and the mountains. They were surrounded by smiling relatives tending to the land, a simple yet harmonious picture of ordinary human life. An elderly woman spoke enthusiastically of her grandmother's legacy, to always use every last crumb and never waste resources. The family, meanwhile, was dining at the communal table, the girl burying pickles in a clay pot, and the man fondly recalling his father, who eagerly explored new plant varieties. The boy recalled his father's poultry farming as a child, and it nearly traumatized him. The image of a bloody chicken was vivid in his mind. But then he admitted that the worst part was getting used to it, smiling as he ate his crispy carriage. He reflected that it was precisely because of his self-sufficient upbringing that he was able to stand firmly on his feet even in an unfamiliar world. Repeating these words quietly to himself, he felt a new strength in them. The girl explained that the goddess had summoned her into this world of her own free will. Another character added that the spirit had told him about it. The little girl asked if she could see the spirit, but received a negative answer, after which she regretfully admitted that she had missed the opportunity to weave this into her story. He gently assured her that he didn't consider her a liar, adding that she didn't seem like the type to deceive. The girl listened silently, grateful for his trust. The girl smiled warmly, thanking him for his understanding, and then the conversation smoothly shifted to the boy, who wondered if his father still had hair and whether his mother had become even more absent-minded. She responded by expressing hope that their grandparents were alive and still sane. He thoughtfully asked if his older brother had found a job, and the girl, looking out the window, asked if their brother and sister were happily married. She sadly remarked that she would never know the answers, as there was no turning back. Then she reassured him, saying she was fine, as the local people were friendly, even if the food wasn't always tasty. She admitted that she didn't feel lonely and didn't like to return to the past. The dark-haired boy explained that in their family, non-interference in others' affairs was valued and they knew how to live peacefully, even if someone disappeared. He admitted that he tries not to dwell on memories of the old world. Rina recalled a recent incident that had made her realize how close death was even here. Apologizing for her dark thoughts, she heard Keita admit he was still reeling from the experience and offered to get some cookies while she sorted out the remaining ingredients. The guy quickly offered to help her carry something, but she gently stopped him, saying that helping was not his responsibility, and advised him not to burden himself with unnecessary things for now. Under the starry sky, she thanked him for his concern. He replied that he didn't feel alone, because there were kind people like her in the world. The man examined the flour closely and noticed that it looked like regular wheat flour. The woman explained that it was the same product sold everywhere, suitable for both cookies and scones, only the grinding degree differed. He was surprised to learn that the dish was made from simple, everyday ingredients, not rare or magical ones. He was amazed at how something so complete and delicious could be created from ordinary things. She asked if he cooked himself, and he replied that the nightly order had its own dining hall. The girl was surprised to realize that, due to the strict regime, the knights had almost no time to enjoy their meals. He admitted that he hadn't previously been interested in cooking or flavors until he tried her dishes. It was then that he realized there was more to food than just satisfying food. The man thoughtfully remarked that food now seemed special to him, a pleasure he longed to experience again and again. Beside him, the maid listened with quiet attention, trying not to interrupt. She softly uttered Zeke's name, then, blushing slightly, admitted that his words made her feel uneasy. She added that she believed good food made life happier, and he listened with warm composure. Fina cheerfully invited him to come over anytime, promising to bake a multitude of new sweets. The young man replied seriously that he hoped to come one day not as a customer, but as someone closer to her. A young man unexpectedly asked to work at the cafe. The girl was confused, worried about his dismissal from the order and the dangers, and another customer jokingly asked if he wasn't afraid of the local crime, adding that she wouldn't want to guard anyone herself. He admitted that he wanted to learn to cook like her and one day inspire someone with his own hands, just as she had once inspired him. In the kitchen, Silva bowed deeply, making a request, which surprised Fina considerably. She thought with disbelief that he must be serious, as his fear of being attacked by a drunkard seemed to have vanished without a trace. She admitted that she was having a hard time keeping up with the volume of baked goods, and then added with a slight smile that she really could use some help, looking directly at the man standing in front of her. That night, under the moonlight, a turning point occurred. It was then that cooking changed the young man's life. Meanwhile, the girl nervously reflected on how taming an animal was like feeding it, while the man calmly cleaned up nearby. Kageyama asked Zeke if he was ready, and the girl cheerfully asked if the uniform was appropriate. In response, the young man thought the outfit perfectly emphasized his role as manager. The girl couldn't take her eyes off the dazzling glow emanating from the attractive young man, while the other guy stood nearby, confused, slightly irritated by the attention being paid to him. The new intern, with noticeable excitement, agreed to help from that day on, and a few days after the incident with the drunk guest, the Omusubai cafe once again found its usual calm atmosphere. Miru explained that the bread needed time to rise and showed the dough she'd made the night before. Then she suggested they begin the morning lesson, and the others listened attentively. The girl explained that the fermentation process is the work of microorganisms that improve the product. The guy anxiously asked if it was true that there were microbes inside, but she reassured him that they were harmless and not worth worrying about. The dough was then removed, pressed lightly to release the gas, and cut into round portions. Afterward, it was covered with a damp cloth and left to rest, monitoring the temperature, while it rose again. Kageyama confidently declared that baking bread was simple, just bake it in the oven for 30 minutes. Fina agreed, but another participant hesitantly admitted that, while it all sounded logical, he was somehow picturing a stone loaf. Kageyama was surprised to find that what he was holding was not what he expected. Miru, smiling awkwardly, confirmed that it was indeed bread, while in the background, soft loaves were rising plumply in the oven. He offered a freshly baked piece, noting that it was perfectly cooked inside. The second man praised the softness and slight sweetness, surprised by how different the taste was from his usual one. Kageyama tasted the bread and smiled thoughtfully, and Fina cheerfully remarked that the first loaf is always the most special. He modestly countered that it was all down to her skill, calling her truly talented. When he asked why she was reacting that way, Silva sheepishly replied that such things were common in his world and asked him not to call her the manager anymore, it sounded too awkward. He explained that in the knightly order the relationship between superiors and subordinates is extremely strict, and he was simply accustomed to such a hierarchy. The girl advised him to relax a little and not be so formal, suggesting he address her by her first name. He paused, imagining how that would sound instead of the usual mentor. The narrative noted that Zeke's first job at the cafe began with baking bread. The cheerful girl clenched her fist in anticipation of the opening, and the man, standing with his back to her, was gently dismissed. After that, he dove headfirst into his work, selling baked goods, wiping down counters, and refilling baskets with fresh bread. A cat meowed softly outside the window, and someone watered the flowers by the entrance. Soon, the customers noticed the attractive man standing at the counter and could not resist enthusiastic comments, repeatedly calling him handsome, while he calmly poured water, trying not to pay attention. The cafe door creaked, letting in the morning light, and a cheerful waitress greeted the customers with a friendly smile. A young man held a drink in his hands, and a little girl peered cautiously from behind him. Two women followed them and one asked if Risa was the manager, explaining that they had come on Tasha's recommendation and were interested in checking out her cafe. Fina politely took their sweets order, explaining that they'd heard about the place because Tasha couldn't stop praising her daughter's cooking. The others unanimously confirmed that they'd decided to come specifically because of her ravings. The girl listed the menu items, a Swiss roll and 2 types of scones. Then one customer asked dubiously about the whipped cream, joking that it was a kitchen sponge, and a third asked, perplexed, what a Swiss roll even was. The young man admitted he didn't know much about desserts, and the girl offered to explain it visually, to show him and let him try it. Another guest quickly added that the dessert was named for its appearance, not its origin. An elegantly presented dessert set appeared on the tray, a roulade and 2 fragrant scones. A small spirit hovering nearby joyfully exclaimed that the sample was ready and looked magnificent. Fina served the roll and scones to the customers, explaining that the roll was softer and sweeter, while the scones were best enjoyed with jam, honey, or whipped cream. Her calm delivery made the tasting almost a ceremony. One of the women turned around with a gentle smile, and the other, pointing to the glasses on the table, asked what they should drink. The man next to her listened imperturbably, not interfering in the conversation. The girl with the braid thanked her for the service and said everything was even better than Tasha had described, promising to definitely return. The waitress cheerfully assured her that she would tell other guests about their visit. Later, Zeke asked if it was time to close, and Risa confirmed that they needed to clean. She praised him for his flawless first day, noting that he had the composure of a former knight, but he sheepishly retorted that he had no experience in housekeeping. The girl insisted that he had done a brilliant job, but Zeke, with an inscrutable expression, admitted that he barely understood how to communicate with clients and did not smile at all. She gently remarked that he was simply one of those people who helped others without realizing it. To this, the young man suggested moving on to tomorrow's preparations and showing her the process of kneading dough. The girl explained that she uses yeast derived from the real fruit for her bread dough. The boy listened silently, and the story remarked that it's sometimes impossible to understand someone unless they're connected by friendship or family. He wondered if the mysterious stranger was a creature from another world. His gaze became serious, and his face showed quiet reflection. The cafe became noisy and lively. The number of customers had noticeably increased. One girl was surprised by the influx of guests, while another explained that Tasha's friends had told everyone they knew about the place, spreading the word by word of mouth. The waiter brought out a lunch set with omuris to two girls. One of them gasped with delight. The man next to him asked where Risa had found such a talented assistant, and she replied that it was just a coincidence. Zeke, who had recently started working there, came up in conversation. Someone remarked on his surprisingly quick mastery of baking, while another admitted they'd previously underestimated his abilities. Fina happily thanked Mira for the ready-made mixer. Mira told her father had asked her to deliver the news and added that she would pick it up right after her shift. The girl happily debated whether to start with ice cream or sponge cake, then excitedly announced that she would finally get a mixer. A young man nearby asked if anything special had happened. They started talking about the benefits of a mixer for expanding their dessert selection. One of the people present enthusiastically said he'd definitely stop by tomorrow, while the other, with a wary smile, noted to himself that the child had an especially big appetite. In the cafe's kitchen, the young woman admitted that she opened it not just for fun, but because she found the local food bland. She dreamed of changing the culinary culture of Filipponia and inspiring people to enjoy authentic flavors. Zeke said with a serious expression that, as the first student, it was his responsibility to prepare the first dish she would try. The girl nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging his words, and with a gentle smile replied that she would look forward to it. Zeke was described as a silent and almost impassive man, rarely showing emotion. Fina, holding a bowl in her hands, reminded him to pick up the mixer, and he calmly complied, his expression unchanging. Kageyama stood at the sink, thoughtfully washing dishes, thinking about how he wanted to cook himself to inspire others. Meanwhile, Lena watched him from the street, amazed that he actually worked there and certain that one day his dishes would speak for themselves. The girl recognized the knight standing at the entrance. It was Reinhard Hull, Zeke's comrade. She cautiously asked if he had come to see his comrade, who was still inside, but he calmly replied that he had not. Risa recalled her former life, ordinary workdays, where cooking was merely a pleasant hobby, not a profession. Then a colleague approached her and asked her to make copies of documents, returning her to the daily routine. A woman with dark hair pulled back into a ponytail stood at the copy machine, staring thoughtfully at the light from the copies, wondering if this was really what she wanted to do with her life. Kageyama quietly mentioned that it was his day off, but Silva worriedly asked if everything was okay, as he'd seemed somewhat distant this morning. He replied calmly that he'd simply forgotten to turn on something important, as if it were an afterthought. The girl tried to concentrate as she started the mixer for a new dessert, but thoughts of yesterday's conversation haunted her. With each turn of the blades, she felt her concentration slipping and her anxiety growing. The young man turned sharply on the woman, accusing her of leading Zeke astray. He reminded her that they had endured the arduous training together at the Night Academy, and she merely listened to his accusations, stunned. A man in uniform recalled a talented, hard-working young man who was tipped for a captain's position, while a woman bitterly recalled how she tried to dissuade him from leaving the restaurant after he submitted his resignation. Kageyama calmly countered that a knight with a stable career and an impending promotion seemed far more reliable than an employee of a cafe that could close at any moment. Fina listened with concern, and he added that he was even more experienced at cooking. One of the characters insisted that Zeke didn't belong here and should return to where he was truly needed. The other listened silently, his gaze reflecting surprise and concern. They discussed how to convince Zeke to return to the order. The girl was surprised by his sudden appearance, and he explained that he was relatively free today and decided to see everything for himself, considering it a useful experience. He praised the pudding for its unusual texture, dense on the outside but instantly melting in the mouth, and admitted it was his favorite dessert of all he'd ever tried. The girl smiled softly, thinking that everyone has the right to choose their own path. The girl with the bun advised Kageyama to turn the dish over on the plate before serving it, and the narrative noted how complex and contradictory this world is, where even Zeke's actions are dictated by personal motives. The next day, two excited girls ran up to the counter, asking Zeke to take their order. Another waitress sheepishly explained the situation, but the young man calmly promised to be with them in a minute, immediately impressing them with his politeness. The ponytailed girl refused to dine elsewhere, insisting she could eat at home. The waitress gently coaxed her to try the local menu, and soon the cheerful customer ordered 2 sandwiches and settled in at the counter. At the bar, one guest asked what bread was, another calmly replied that she could eat it at home, and a third, with a playful smile, offered to sit next to her. After all, an attractive guy worked there. Fina mused as the customers prepared to leave, wondering if the cafe would turn back into a bakery without Zeke. And Miro quietly admitted that perhaps she was the only one who liked her dishes. The elegantly arranged dishes sat on the table, drawing admiration from those present. One guest remarked with amazement on the skillful presentation, while another asked if it was true that Risa had prepared all of this herself. At the table, one woman excitedly declared she was ready to get married as soon as she said the word, to which another dismissed the idea. A third curiously asked if she'd ever considered becoming a cook while a waitress served drinks nearby. The girl modestly admitted that she wasn't particularly skilled, but she simply cooked for the pleasure of it. She then served a carefully prepared sandwich and, with a gentle smile, wished him bon appetit. Fina looked at the dish doubtfully, unsure whether it was bread or something in between. She was offered the chance to eat it with her hands, as is, and, a little nervously, she carefully took her first bite. Lena marveled at how the filling could be both soft and crispy. Fina listened silently as she enthusiastically confessed that she'd fallen in love with the taste. The girl was surprised to hear her friend confess that she'd come for the handsome guy but stayed for the delicious food. A third customer thanked them and wished them a pleasant stay, trying to suppress a smile. The baker thoughtfully noted that customers came back again and again to try her dishes, finding comfort in them. She thought this was thanks to both her adoptive parents and Zeke, each of whom had supported her in their own way. The girl clutched the tray tightly, feeling a nervous tension and realizing that her life was now tied to this world of professionals. At the same time, she quietly admitted to herself that she felt relieved, even though she hadn't found herself here by choice. Inside the cafe, the young man and woman exchanged a brief glance. She hesitantly agreed with his words, and he thought it would be worth talking to Zeke, who needed time to think everything over. Mira reassured Zeke that there was nothing to apologize for, but he did apologize for the inconvenience. She added that she understood what Reinhard meant as they stood next to each other at the kitchen table. Zeke asked for a moment and promised to return soon. The girl agreed to close the cafe herself, and when he left, she reflected on whether he really needed time, as he wouldn't have chosen the chef's profession if he hadn't found himself in this world. He returned unexpectedly quickly, causing the girl to jump at his sudden cry. Then, seeing his silhouette at the door, she exclaimed his name with genuine surprise. Zeke abruptly grabbed the calm young man by the collar, who calmly explained that he'd found him easily, knowing where he patrolled. Zeke, frowning, demanded to know what was going on. The girl indignantly declared that someone was filling Zeke's head with nonsense again, while another mentioned the remaining pudding in the fridge. The young man, surprised, asked why he'd been dragged there during a break, and the waiter calmly invited him to sit down. The man firmly declared that blaming Risa was unfair and placed the pudding on the table as a response to all the accusations. His companion looked at the dessert with irritation and confusion, at a loss for words. Kageyama hesitantly tried something from a spoon, and another man, holding a plate, asked what it was. The man merely shrugged and suggested he try it himself to see. He took a cautious sip and paused, amazed by the taste, noting he'd never tasted anything like it. The other two watched in silence, noticing the look of surprise and admiration on his face. Kageyama reflected thoughtfully on the role of the knightly order to protect order and uplift the people's spirit. But then he firmly declared that he now intended to follow Risa's path, not return to the order. He admitted defeat after the tasting, smiling and saying he'd known the outcome all along. Acknowledging his opponent's talent, the young man said so with respect and a hint of pride. Risa winced at being called too soft, after which the girl next to her sternly reminded Zeke not to get physical. The boy, looking down guiltily, apologized for his outburst, while the other calmly remarked that it was all just out of concern for him. Kageyama inquired about the problem and was told that the yolks imparted a strong flavor to the dessert and sweetened the pudding base. He then added that the only thing needed now was to adjust the bitterness of the caramel sauce. Kageyama calmly told Zeke that he shouldn't talk about people like that. The girl, hearing this, thoughtfully noted that she'd learned something important today, while Zeke merely watched her silently. Meanwhile, outside the cafe, someone cheerfully thanked him for the treat, adding warmth to the moment. He asked if she was sure she wanted to follow an inexperienced manager like himself. Then he confessed that he no longer worked for personal satisfaction, his goal now was to make customers smile when they tasted his dishes. This was where he saw the true meaning of his work. Kageyama unexpectedly confessed that he had fallen in love, stunning the girl. He remembered how her promise in cooking had once inspired him sufficiently. However, she responded with a cold, distant gaze, as if unwilling to believe what she had heard. A young man and woman in staff uniforms stood at the entrance to the cafe, determined to support each other as newcomers. A cloaked figure, hidden in the shadows, watched them silently from around the corner. The next page showed a recipe titled Exciting Cooking with Risa and Basil, Part 2, Mini Tamagoyaki Pan Rolls. The ingredients listed included eggs, pancake mix, milk, cream, and condensed milk. The camera showed the quiet Omusubai Cafe, located in a back alley of the Kingdom of Philipporia. Green plants framed the building, giving the place an atmosphere of calm and comfort. Kageyama served the dish with a polite bon appetit, and the customer delightedly remarked on how light it was. The narration explained that the unusual quality of the cuisine was making the establishment increasingly popular. Fina greeted the two visitors joyfully, and they responded with warm smiles, feeling that her greeting was natural and sincere. The manager mused about being transported from another world while the waiter served drinks. The woman with the braid sat at the counter, smiling quietly, as if observing the harmony that reigned in the cafe. Fina cheerfully praised everyone for their excellent work, and Kageyama thanked Zeke for his help and noted that the number of clients had noticeably increased. In response, he calmly began explaining his future plans. The girl suggested increasing the baking volume starting tomorrow, noticing the empty baskets. She added that more and more guests were ordering sandwiches, and the demand for bread was constantly growing, so they could barely keep up with the baking. She recalled that sandwiches were a common food on Earth, but for the inhabitants of this world, the taste seemed completely new. Zeke enthusiastically pointed to the lettuce between the slices as part of the flavor magic. The young man insisted that increasing bread production was his direct responsibility, despite his fears that it would increase his workload. Another interlocutor noted that sales were already growing, but Zeke merely nodded, determined. Basil eagerly volunteered to help, and soon everyone was working together to improve the cafe. One held the baskets, another developed the plan, noting that a whole month had already passed since the cafe opened. Kageyama carried a tall stack of boxes, while a girl in a maid's uniform read a letter, smiling. Both were grateful for the busy day and the success their talented employee had brought. As she exited the building, she noticed something strange at the entrance. Leaves, trash, and other debris lay on the ground, and her expression reflected surprise and alarm. The pungent smell of rotting garbage made her wince. She immediately assumed it was a cruel prank, and the moment he appeared next to her, she cried out his name, feeling a mixture of relief and indignation. He calmly recalled how everything had been the day he first arrived and suggested that Risa begin preparing for the opening, promising to take care of the cleaning. The girl nodded, realizing that today would be an especially large amount of bread to bake. Having decided to work overtime, she thought with irritation that it was disgusting to ruin her master's workshop like that. Meanwhile, Zeke and Risa debated whether to report the attacks, but the girl didn't want to cause a fuss.
Kageyama, with a gentle smile, suggested they wait and see if this was a one-off.
At that moment, someone protested, claiming they hadn't ordered 3 boxes of cattle feed, and a lump of dirt immediately flew out the window. Holding his cup in his hands, Kageyama considered what was happening and decided to ask Reinhard, a regular customer at the cafe, about how to proceed in a situation where the business was clearly being hindered. The girl with short dark hair asked if there were any leads, but the guy confidently replied that he hadn't given anyone cause for anger. Then the girl with the hairpins hesitantly suggested that she might have accidentally hit someone, although she didn't know anyone suspicious.
A cheerful girl greeted Angelica with a warm good morning when she entered, apologizing for being late.
Angelica explained she'd come to pick up the bread she'd ordered, smiling slightly embarrassed. 2 girls were quietly discussing the manager. One asked if everything was alright and if he was ever short-tempered, while the other replied that the incident with the drunk customer had resulted in just a fine. Nearby, 2 men were commenting on how the manager seemed to live in his own world, and one remarked that this could be dangerous. One of them sternly told the other to keep an eye on her, adding that he didn't need reminding. His tone was confident, without unnecessary words.
Silva asked Risa if she was going to the store that night, warning her that it was dangerous to walk alone.
Risa looked at her puzzled, unsure what she was talking about, and asked what had happened. The girl with long hair, yawning, noticed Risa's strange behavior at such a late hour and looked out the window, where someone was leisurely walking along the street. Suddenly, the boy realized something and loudly exclaimed that he'd figured it out. The girl, frightened, explained that she thought he'd simply forgotten something and gone back for it, much to the surprise of the others. The group discussed in amazement how they could have failed to notice anything suspicious, living literally just across the street. One of them suggested the intruder was probably a woman, judging by her small stature and light steps.
Kageyama hypothesized that one of the regulars might have feelings for Zeke.
Silva quipped that he was incredibly slow in such matters, and Lena enthusiastically supported the idea. Keita joked that the girl was simply jealous of Risa and wanted to take over the cafe after they were fired. The other 2 reacted with a mixture of irritation and laughter, finding it overly dramatic. Risa calmly explained that the damage was still minor and there was no need to alarm the knights, but Zeke suggested catching the culprit and increasing patrols in the area to be on the safe side. He admitted that he understood the girl's feelings if she was truly in love with Zeke. Risa responded by suggesting that they could talk to her, as the regular client was unlikely to mean any real harm, even though she was acting a bit too frivolously. Fina offered Risa to stay the night with her, since the house was nearby and safe, but Kageyama firmly refused, saying that this was out of the question and that staying alone was still dangerous. The girl hesitated, but her fair-haired friend cheerfully suggested a compromise, not just spend the night, but cook dinner together at her place. As they parted, everyone exchanged brief greetings, and 2 men in vests reminded them to call if anything got out of hand. Angelica agreed to clean the room and, with a smile, promised to stop by later. Risa thought she should go home and explain everything, and the 2 children casually remarked that the Claude family was being overly restless. A nearby man and woman exchanged a glance of quiet understanding. He noted that she seemed happy and didn't look like a victim of bullying. The girl calmly replied that minor insults weren't that hard to bear, as there were always people ready to support her. The man warned her to remain vigilant, and she nodded, promising to remember. Outside, a yawning girl waved them a good day as the sun slowly set behind the building. The girl with the bow asked about Mr. Gunt, and the other, rubbing her eyes, said that her father was still sleeping and asked me to say hello to him, adding this with a lazy smile of morning warmth. The girl told her mentor that someone was standing outside, surprising him. At that moment, the woman remembered how useful the hand mixer had been at dinner and thought it was worth repeating. Kageyama suddenly shouted, spotting a cloaked figure by the fire, causing it to flinch. Lena watched in horror as flames flared up nearby, calling his name in alarm. The mysterious man in the cloak raised his hands, stemming the flames. Nearby, a girl screamed in alarm, fearing the flames might spread to the food crates. She desperately tried to contain the raging fire, praying for it to die down. Whirlwinds of flames swirled around her, and her hands trembled with fear and exhaustion. In a panic, the girl thought that the shop could burn to the ground, and she asked herself in confusion what she should do now. A few weeks after opening, a huge line formed outside the shop.
People enthusiastically declared that the bread was so delicious that even the royal family ordered it, and the flow of customers never dwindled. The girl, who had been dreaming of trying this bread, suddenly became frightened and ran away. Her silhouette flashed at the end of the street, and passers-by followed her with puzzled glances. Risa struggled to keep going as the flames intensified, hurriedly urging them to find water. Zeke called her name, and she noticed the smoke smelled unusual. Frightened, she thought the cafe might burn down, and Zeke, sensing a strange smell, ordered everyone to move away and warn the neighbors, despite her confusion. She remembered that she had recently opened this cafe and had already managed to create precious memories here that she did not want to lose. The young man carried a tray of freshly baked bread, remembering all the kind people he had met here and their warm smiles that made him feel like he had found his place in this world. The determined girl clenched her fist and declared she wouldn't let this place disappear. Then, standing at the door, she called loudly for Angelica and Mr. Gunt to help her. People ran out into the street with buckets as the fire raged, and the girl insistently ordered them to pour water without stopping. Everyone worked together, trying to put out the flames as quickly as possible. When the fire was finally extinguished, the group examined the charred wall and breathed a sigh of relief. One of the men assured Risa that the cafe was safe, though her expression still showed concern. Risa apologized to Zeke, explaining that her legs had given out from relief. She immediately collapsed, and Zeke and the maid ran to support her while he anxiously monitored her condition. The man noted with relief that no one was injured and that the fire had occurred before the opening. The woman thanked everyone for their assistance, and the others supported each other with kind words and actions. The girl reassured everyone, saying everything was fine now and apologizing for the disturbance. She thanked Mr. Gunt for shelter, and he replied that she could always count on him. Off to the side, another whispered about the previous attacks. The young man explained that the girl had been hiding in the shadows, and the two women were surprised to recognize her as a worker from Chester's bakery. They exchanged confused glances, not expecting such a turn of events. Mira gasped and turned around abruptly, and Angelica remembered the baker's daughter. A man nearby asked her to fetch the girl's parents, and she confidently said she would do so immediately. The girl greeted them warmly, remarking that they looked well, and invited them inside to talk, while the other two stood behind her, maintaining a silent calm. Kageyama asked Lina a direct question about the recent attacks, but she merely looked down, at a loss for words. Silva stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the conversation with cold interest. The man called out to Helena sharply, and she jumped in surprise as the doorbell rang. Behind him, the girl watched anxiously, sensing the growing tension in the room. Angelica thanked someone before leaving, and then the man angrily ordered the young man to stand up and asked if he realized what he had done. A woman nearby watched the scene, sensing the growing tension between them. The woman bowed and apologized, bowing deeply and uttering regretful words of remorse for her daughter's actions. This stunned one of the girls, who hadn't expected such a strong display of guilt and stood there with an expression of amazement. The girl whispered in surprise that even in this world, people bowed in apology. A young man nearby asked, perplexed, what she admired. Meanwhile, the two adults continued to bow deeply, begging for forgiveness, while a third man tried to stop them, explaining that he had already severely punished his daughter. The man introduced himself as Paul Chester, the owner of a local bakery, and gestured to a quiet girl standing nearby, calling her his daughter Helena, who was silent, looking at the floor. He said he'd heard about the bakery's fame and the Ashley Company's recipes, but no matter how many times he tried, his bread turned out rock hard. So he decided to find out how they achieved their success. The young man confessed to his father that he was at fault and apologized for not explaining everything properly. His father, however, listened with a stern expression, suspecting the store was deliberately concealing its recipe. The young man took responsibility for all the previous attacks, and Helena, unable to hold back her tears, insisted that she never intended to set the shop on fire. Her emotions overwhelmed her, and her voice trembled with remorse. The girl confessed to using a special wood that released a strange odor when burned to cause a commotion. The man then warned her that it was highly flammable and used by knights to repel insects, and the elderly owner sharply reprimanded her for her recklessness. She slammed her palm down on the table in anger, saying she was afraid the family business would go bankrupt. Everything she did seemed like a desperate attempt to protect the store she loved. The man asked irritably if the others were hearing the rumors being spread behind their backs. Nearby, they were whispering that the bread from Chester's had gone bad, that the yard supplier sign was fake, and that the title should rightfully go to the Omusabai Cafe. Helena passionately explained that her father's bakery was her pride and joy, and that regular customers came there for their bread, but now their honor had been insulted. The man calmly replied that if she truly valued the place, she should understand the consequences of her actions. The girl firmly declared that no matter how he defaced or burned her shop, she could restore everything, but she couldn't restore a damaged reputation. If he truly valued their business, he wouldn't have done such a thing. Helena burst into tears, choking on apologies, and the young man standing next to her tried to calm her down. The serious woman watched from the sidelines, not interfering, but her gaze was filled with concern. The girl asked Zik about the punishment for arson, and he explained that it was punishable by community service. A man nearby panicked and begged for leniency, wiping sweat from his brow. Fina firmly stated that she wasn't so kind as to simply forgive, but she declared that they were willing to make amends. Paul nervously confirmed that he was a baker and agreed to the proposal to settle things amicably. A cheerful girl with a warm smile declared that the debt would be repaid through hard work, by their own hands. Her words were humorous, easing the tension, and a subdued laugh rang out in the hall. Two workers carried a board while two women nearby discussed how a Musabai cafe was forced to take an extra day off to repair a wall. One of them expressed surprise at how quickly news spread. Two girls were talking about how sad it would be if the bakery didn't reopen, as they always got their bread there. They wondered if the baked goods would be sold elsewhere, oblivious to the soft sunlight illuminating the restored cafe. In the kitchen, Fina sternly scolded Paul for pouring water incorrectly, reminding him to measure precisely and adjust the dough's softness with flour. Paul stood there, holding a bag, looking at her in confusion, not quite understanding what he'd done wrong. She explained that while the amount of water could be determined by eye, all the loaves needed to taste the same if they were to be sold. Paul sheepishly apologized for his oversight and promised to follow the recipe. Kageyama noted to himself that, unlike Zeke, who had learned everything from scratch, the problem here wasn't the ingredients, but precision. Fina confirmed that previously, everything was measured by eye and no attention to detail was paid. The experienced baker, accustomed for years to doing everything her own way, was now having trouble remembering how to achieve an airy texture in bread. At that moment, the girl jumped at a loud sound coming from behind the counter. The girl quickly apologized for spilling water on the table, and the guy calmly offered to get a rag. They both felt slightly embarrassed as they stood by the window, the drops trickling down the edge of the table. A cheerful girl with a mischievous smile exclaimed that the debt would be repaid with their own bodies. The young man next to her blushed, and the girl stared at her in surprise, unsure how to react to such an ambiguous statement. Risa suggested that Paul take over the baking for the cafe and that Helena join the waitstaff. The two nearby women recoiled in shock, thinking they were about to be sold, and Paul quickly waved his hands, denying any such misunderstanding. The man insisted that the girl's actions couldn't be ignored and offered to compensate her with labor. Helena looked down anxiously, and the young man agreed, adding that all she needed to do was help out at the cafe to atone for her guilt. Kageyama asked Paul a businesslike question about the price of his bread, and he nodded awkwardly in agreement when the conversation turned to joint cooperation and labor compensation. The man announced the price 1 livre, and the woman, after thinking about it, agreed on the condition that he teach her how to make the same bread so that the exchange would be fair. The woman explained that she wanted to establish a fixed supply of bread at a set price while maintaining consistent quality. The man looked surprised, and the other woman added that their cafe was aiming to spread new culinary techniques through the company Ashley. The girl in the vest looked up in surprise when the man called her by name, Helena. She thanked him and said she saw no contradiction in his help, as it was more than she could have expected. The two bowed to the people seated before them, apologizing for the inconvenience. The man standing next to them promised to rely on their help in the future and offered to train the staff in cooking and service to support Paul's shop. He announced that the bread was ready, and the girl looked at him in surprise. The story noted that the bread was once again hard as a rock, and both understood that their collaboration would be beneficial to both parties. Paul quietly apologized, and Fina angrily exclaimed that she couldn't believe how powerful the curse of stone bread could be. They both stood there, grim and shadowed, looking at the failed baked goods. Fina gently encouraged her new assistant, telling him not to worry, it was only his first day. She suggested he eat a good meal to lift his spirits, while Kageyama watched from the sidelines, frowning thoughtfully. The menu listed a creamy stew and mallow salad, with a note stating that the fruit tasted like apple and orange, highlighting the freshness of the ingredients served. She placed a plate in front of the guests, explaining that this was exactly what they served at their cafe. The patrons thanked her for the magnificent dish and admired the harmony of its colors and shape. Kageyama reminded the girl to memorize the information so she could respond to customers, and she quickly nodded. The others smiled and remarked that the food seemed much less appetizing compared to this presentation. Everyone thanked the goddess and the spirits for the meal and then prepared to eat. Kageyama thought that, even though Zeke had become Helena's mentor, she still felt awkward in front of him and couldn't relax. Kageyama tried the bread in question and noted with disgust that the baked goods from Chester's were tasteless, not at all comparable to the soft and aromatic bread from the Omusubai cafe. He finally took a bite and admitted the bread tasted good, and Miru sheepishly apologized for her hasty words. They reassured her, noting that she had finally admitted defeat after numerous failed attempts to buy a loaf of bread at the cafe. Helena, with a grateful smile, said the food was delicious. One of the men assured her that soon her father would be able to bake just as deliciously, while the other listened silently, containing his emotions. Kageyama asked Risa to be gentle with him, acknowledging that he still had much to learn. Fina stood behind him, listening attentively to their conversation. The determined young man promised to bake a bread everyone would love. The woman, with a slight smile, admitted she had been looking forward to it, though she still felt uneasy about the outcome. In the kitchen, Miru told Paul she'd teach him how to make yeast before the reopening, to which he asked, puzzled, what it was. Outside, the narrator remarked that the two had made a truly fortunate choice. The man began explaining the process. First, boil a glass jar, then place the chopped fruit, peel and seeds in it, and add a spoonful of honey water. The woman clarified that he meant 1 tablespoon. The girl explained that the preparation was complete, but the dough would only rise in a few days. The guy asked if that was all, and she advised keeping the jar in a warm place, stirring it daily, and protecting it from direct sunlight. Fina explained to the baker that fermentation is a change caused by the action of yeast, showed him a mature sourdough starter, and explained that mixing it with wheat flour creates the basis for bread. Paul listened with obvious interest. He admired the complexity of the process, noting that high taste is achieved precisely through patience and careful work. The girl glanced anxiously toward the window where Helena and Paul stood. The man confidently declared that he would strictly follow the recipe and measure the ingredients precisely, and the woman smiled encouragingly. Zeke explained to a girl how to fill out an order form correctly, emphasizing the importance of specifying the start, duration, and end dates. Another girl, with a slight chuckle, thought he always spoke with passion but was too brief. She politely asked him to speak more slowly and asked for writing utensils, apologizing for her poor memory. Zeke replied that he didn't want to offer half-hearted service, and she sincerely stated that she wanted to do her job properly. He called her over and explained that he was using an old bank form, which Risa had suggested she use for notes, and then offered to give her some more if that wasn't enough. A few days later, the uniformed waitress smiled and confidently said there was nothing to worry about. The short-haired girl blushed and thanked her with genuine warmth. Helena arrived early and tidied up the place. Paul's efforts in mastering baking were appreciated, and the wall gradually recovered. Omusubai Cafe reopened. At the bakery, a young woman greeted Paul warmly, who apologized breathlessly for being late delivering fresh bread. She remarked on the pleasant smell of the room. The girl happily announced that the bread was now baked properly and could be safely sold here. Paul noted with satisfaction that the training was paying off, and she promised to tell everyone that the cafe's bread was now baked at the Chesters. Fina apologized for the inconvenience, and Kageyama explained that they had just reopened and weren't sure if their regular customers would return right away. The young man reassured Helena, saying this was their special family debut. The girl with the hairpins advised her to focus on work, and Helena nodded quietly, determined to prove she was worthy of a second chance. The man informed Risa that everything was ready to open, and the other thanked Paul for his diligence and said that he trusted them with his daughter, hoping that she would be taken care of. A short-haired woman announced it was time to open, and a dark-haired woman, smiling, invited them to welcome this wonderful workday with joy. A third person listened from behind the counter. Then the woman headed for the door, musing on a new beginning and a colleague who had appeared after past troubles that had dramatically changed their lives. Risa stood with a bouquet in her hands and a beaming smile, accepting congratulations from an elderly couple. The woman with the flower in her hair solemnly promised to work as hard as she could, even if she lost some customers. Unexpectedly for herself, Risa heard a warm greeting from Angelica and her companions from the Street of Masters, who came to congratulate her on the opening and present flowers. A girl with flowers reflected on those present, while a man in a vest greeted guests at the entrance. A nearby couple joyfully admitted their happiness at having lunch in a cafe again after all the difficulties they had endured. The cafe was buzzing with activity, it had regained its popularity. Helena offered to take care of the flowers, and after a brief hesitation, the new employee was assured there was nothing wrong with her. Angelica cheerfully introduced herself as a regular at the cafe and said she was 17 years old, surprised to find that she and Helena were almost the same age. Helena sheepishly replied that she was 16. Fina greeted them warmly, saying that she had chosen the beautiful flowers herself, and the other girl remarked on how the tension between them instantly melted, calling it a truly angelic moment. The little girl angrily declared that she hated anyone who caused trouble for her mistress. The woman in the waistcoat called out in surprise to Basil, who, sitting with his arms crossed, muttered his disagreement. Basil apologized for disturbing her, and the girl offered to keep an eye on Helena since she couldn't see him. She then asked him to watch her while she cooked. The little girl enthusiastically accepted the task, assuring her mistress that she could handle it. Meanwhile, Basil informed Risa that the orders had been accepted, explaining that he was going out on business, and wished her a good day. Fina, holding a tray, told the seated woman that everyone deserves a second chance. In response, the determined girl promised her hostess that Basil would keep an eye on her to prevent any further trouble. The waitress approached the table and asked if the guests were ready to order. One customer asked for 2 sandwich sets, a roll, a scone, and a cup of herbal tea. Another asked about the creamy stew, and the waitress explained it was a milk-based soup. The girl with pointed, elfin ears noted that everything was going smoothly and thought Zeke's training hadn't been in vain. Another nervously reminded herself to be attentive as she greeted the guests who entered. The waitress offered to show the diners to 2 empty seats. One of the men noticed a new face and asked if they had met before, and the woman, remembering the fire incident, awkwardly looked away. The man suspected that someone had messed up the disinfection, but the waitress gently explained that she had made a mistake earlier and sincerely apologized for the inconvenience. 2 women sitting nearby heard someone recognize her as the girl from the Royal Bakery. Helena, turning pale, hastily denied ever having been a trespasser, clutching the papers tightly in her hands. The man handed her the plates, asking her to set the table. Helena nodded obediently, feeling the cold gazes of the older customers, whom he treated with silent resignation, fixed on her. The waitress served the food, silently acknowledging that she had earned their gratitude. Then she smiled warmly and wished the guests bon appetit. Later, Helena burst into tears, feeling she had earned disapproval. A girl next to her asked why she was so upset and realized she was genuinely remorseful, regretting not having believed in her good intentions earlier. Helena energetically declared that she had to work hard at the cafe that evening. The little girl tried to encourage her, but Helena quickly turned away and walked away, prompting the little girl to call out to her worriedly. After that, the cafe saw a noticeable increase in customers, and Helena found herself with a lot to do. Despite her recent tears, she smiled, holding a selection of cookies and scones, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Fina happily admitted that she adored these sweets, and Miru told her how confused she was when the cafe suddenly closed, but now she is happy to see them on display again. The girl suddenly slipped, screaming in fright as the waitress nervously asked for the bill. Another woman watched anxiously. The girl froze in surprise, and the waitress gently asked if everything was okay and asked her to take her time. She smiled awkwardly, assuring him that she was fine. Fina asked if the cafe was always so busy, and the waitress admitted it was her first day on the job. The girl with the ribbon thanked her for the clear explanation of the menu, although the dishes seemed unusual to her. The young man thanked them for the delicious lunch and wished them success. His calm, sincere manner made a pleasant impression on everyone. The girl was moved by the realization of how dear her father's bakery was to her and how much it meant to others. When a customer expressed his gratitude, she felt a special sense of relief, especially after the fire. Helena smiled and said it had been another good day at work. When asked if she was okay, she admitted she could barely stand. The man praised her for her resilience but clarified that he was referring to the ongoing rumors about the fire. After all, the rumors wouldn't die down that quickly. The girl politely said she wanted to apologize in person and make amends, after which she was asked about something, and the little elf remarked that Basil wouldn't mind. The girl happily inquired how it went. She eagerly asked if she could continue working at the cafe after receiving her compensation, sincerely expressing her desire to start from scratch and prove her dedication to the business. The dark-haired girl asked Helena if she knew the meaning of the establishment's name. She was confused, remembering that it referred to rice triangles. The young man explained that the cafe's name came from his hometown and symbolized unity, as food brings people together. He wanted their establishment to follow this principle. Helena thanked Risa for the opportunity to work alongside her, and she smiled deeply. They were greeted by two Omusabai employees, after which they all shook hands. When things at the cafe were picking up, one of the girls happily mentioned a long-awaited day off. Another suggested hosting a tea party at her place and, laughing, asked if she could make a request. Kageyama wished Risa good morning when she entered, and she responded cheerfully. The woman standing next to him also said hello, but with a slight weary note in her voice. Helena beamed, saying they had another productive day ahead. The second girl excitedly announced that she had paid off the entire renovation debt and was now officially working at the cafe. She enthusiastically admitted that she admired his uniform and was happy to wear it every day. The man, slightly embarrassed, confirmed that the suit was made by Cheryl Mary. The shot showed scattered sewing tools and elegant clothing details, emphasizing that donning such an exquisite outfit, combining tradition and modernity, is every girl's dream at least once in her life. One girl enthusiastically explained that their uniform was designed by Cheryl Mary, while another immediately scolded two colleagues for wearing it without due respect to the brand. A man nearby watched the argument silently, with a slight smile. The girl in the headscarf awkwardly admitted that she had made her high society debut yesterday, spilling her tea in her nervousness. The blonde next to her, smiling calmly, said she was the Marquis's daughter, which completely stunned her interlocutor. Risa imagined a sophisticated ball where ladies and lords converse like celebrities, then explained that her cafe's guests were merely curious about such events. She added that, coming from a farming family, she found it difficult to fit in, as in reality, it was more of a casual get-together in the garden than a formal reception. The girl confidently declared that she couldn't disgrace her patrons, and then the man asked if he was talking about tea. The woman confirmed this but warned her not to be overzealous. One of the ladies spoke proudly about her daughter, expressing a desire to introduce her to everyone, while another person quietly noted that at first they were going to refuse to participate altogether. The woman explained that, thinking of Claude's childless family, she wanted to help them. The short-haired girl smiled, noting that she had ultimately been drawn into the preparations. After mentioning her accelerated training the day before, a girl admitted that being a lady is extremely difficult. Another explained that when it comes to tea, the presentation is more important than the drink itself, and the heroine diligently practiced her posture and manners. Kageyama watched thoughtfully as Fina confessed her guilt toward the Claude family, as her world's knowledge was completely different. He calmly replied that it didn't matter much. Kageyama reminded them that Risa comes from another world, literally different from theirs, but emphasized that he does not consider her an outsider, because the cafe has become part of this connection between worlds. Helena encouraged Risa, telling her there was no need to be afraid and that denying anything without even trying would be a missed opportunity. Then she happily announced that she would still be able to wear the Cheryl Mary dress. Kageyama thanked everyone, expressing his sincere appreciation, and Fina admitted that she had gained a better understanding of the situation. Afterward, she cheerfully suggested they continue business as usual. The man politely approached Mary with a question, and she listened attentively as the narrative noted that people's desires remain the same even if places and circumstances change. An elegant reception was taking place on the lawn in front of a luxurious mansion. Guests in elegant attire were chatting, musicians were preparing to play, and someone off-camera was talking about a request concerning the upcoming tea party. A young man named Gil was called out from afar, and two excited girls ran away, squealing with joy, one admitting that she needed to mentally prepare herself, while the other, nearby, reassured her friend that confidence was more important than fear. The man greeted Tasha and Risa, saying that they had been expected for a long time, and the woman asked with surprise whether the girl next to her was really his daughter. Adele introduced herself as Risa Kirikawa Claude and mentioned that she was a regular at the cafe. Another woman happily noted that Adele was able to attend the celebration dedicated to her and Gil, to which she sheepishly admitted that she had only tried the bread so far. The carriage stopped at the entrance, and it turned out that the new arrival was Queen Adelicia herself. She introduced herself softly and warmly greeted the guests, causing one of the guests to blush in surprise and embarrassment. The woman nervously said she was honored to meet the prince's mother, but the latter calmly explained that she had already abdicated her title and that her son now reigned. Another participant couldn't help but wonder if she, too, should retire and return to Japan. Two men introduced themselves. One said he was Royce, the secretary of the civil service, and the other greeted Miss Risa, adding that he'd heard a lot about her from Gil. The women nearby remarked how nice it was to have such a daughter. Two men were discussing Royce's behavior at work with annoyance, until another suggested starting tea, as all the guests had already arrived. A woman nearby quietly thought it was time to begin. The guests gazed in amazement at the unusual table setting. One wondered aloud what it was, while another remarked that tea drinking culture wasn't developed in this world, and the decision to use the kitchen had proven quite sensible. The host thanked everyone for taking the time to come despite their busy schedules, and then introduced the house's daughter, Claude, noting that some of those present already knew her personally. Risa Kirikawa Claude introduced herself as the owner of the cafe and described the variety of sweets and sandwiches she prepared, adding that she was glad to meet such distinguished guests. Lena admiringly remarked that the dessert looked like it was made of precious stones, and Kageyama, surprised, asked if it was actually food. The waiter then offered to serve the treat if the guests wanted to try it. Risa smiled warmly and asked that the dish be considered her culinary greeting. The narrative then shifted to a bustling cafe, where patrons savored the flavors with genuine delight and curiosity. The woman commented that the cafe's fame was well-deserved, despite the unusual appearance of the dishes. A man nearby remarked that the flavor was rich and paired perfectly with tea, surrounded by satisfied and surprised faces. Fina happily praised the airy, melt-in-your-mouth bread, and the others at the table agreed that Risa's sweets were impossible to stop eating. The girl herself sheepishly replied that she cooks not for profit, but for pleasure. She explained that her outfit only reflects her outer side, and to get to know the real her, you should try the dishes she prepares, because delicious food erases the differences between people, regardless of their social status. Against the backdrop of a majestic building under a cloudy sky, a woman with curled hair thanked her interlocutor, saying they were truly lucky to have such a daughter. The woman calmly thanked her for the kind words. Zeke received praise for his beautiful cake design from a cheerful girl, who declared she could now trust him with it. He politely thanked her and added that he wanted to catch up with Risa soon, to which she smiled and wished him to surpass her. Kageyama modestly admitted that having a rival gave him strength, and then confidently promised to try his best. At that moment, another figure stepped forward, silently expressing determination. Fina cordially invited the lone customer to take a seat and listened attentively when he admitted it was his first time. She cheerfully offered to explain the menu. The man said he'd never heard of such dishes before, and then the girl explained that dinner was being served at that time. Soup, salad, drink, and dessert could be chosen as a set. He studied the menu thoughtfully and settled on rice and soup, and she added with a smile that the dessert might seem strange, but it tasted excellent. He became intrigued and agreed to try it. A young man, hearing rumors of delicious food, stopped by the cafe and noted that people were now coming from far and wide. He wondered if this was the woman rumored to be the owner. The girl explained that Risa was currently in the kitchen and offered to call her, but the man politely declined, saying that he was simply curious and did not want to interfere with the work, after which he thanked her and left. The waitress informed the girl with the hair clip about a new order, and she happily responded. They then discussed how the cafe was quieter in the evening than at lunchtime, but its fame had already spread to neighboring countries, which astonished her. The girl admitted that she was happy to see more and more people trying her dishes, and the man quietly noted that this was largely thanks to him, and nodded with a slight smile. Kageyama decided to add some mallow to the soup and was surprised by how pleasant the unusual flavor was. Meanwhile, Silva sat at the counter, silently observing the proceedings. Keita politely wished him bon appetit as he served the dish, and the customer thanked him. Afterward, as he cleared the tray, Keita quietly remarked that this time the customer was a man, adding that he was simply thinking out loud. One diner sampled the food and remarked that it was a doria dish, but the rice inside was unlike the usual. Another explained that it was chewy and hot because of the cheese, which imparted a special softness and aroma. The hero noted that the milk's flavor was completely different from what he expected. The dish contained hints of seafood, mushrooms, and thinly sliced vegetables, lending it a unique richness and harmony. He tasted the food more closely, detecting a subtle sweetness that enhanced the flavors of all the ingredients. With a wistful smile, he admitted he was amazed the dish truly lived up to all the hype. The customer thanked the waitress for the treat and particularly praised the cake she'd recommended. Handing over the payment, he promised to stop by again, and she politely thanked him and promised to pass his compliments on to the manager. The waitress cautiously inquired how she could help Messrs. Royce and Gill. They apologized for not having announced their visit in advance, and one of them remarked with surprise that he hadn't expected to meet the heads of the magical and civil departments together. The two men politely asked the young waitress for a moment, and she, with a touch of trepidation, agreed. The narrative then shifted outside, revealing a majestic building under a starry sky. Fina poured tea for two seated guests, apologizing for the modest reception. One of the guests assured her he was grateful for their hospitality, despite the unexpected visit. The woman, having confirmed that the service was complete for the day, asked what had happened. The man, visibly tense, admitted it was urgent and mentioned the upcoming conference of royal houses next month. Risa listened attentively as he explained that every 3 years, monarchs and heads of government gather to discuss politics, economics, trade, and technology. Since this time the gathering would be held in their country, she would be preparing the gala banquet. Risa nervously admitted that, despite the fame of her cafe, she had no experience in such matters. The bespectacled man informed the waitress that their neighbors, the Angel family, had requested that they prepare dishes from the cafe for the royal banquet. The waitress listened, dumbfounded. He emphasized that the request was extremely important, as the country's prestige depended on it. Feliformia is renowned for its cuisine and cannot fail to meet guests' expectations, and at that moment, the woman began to understand the magnitude of the responsibility placed upon them. She reacted with surprise to hear that she was being tasked with training the palace chefs in her methods. The man calmly explained that there was still time before the banquet and added that he had no one else to turn to. Another man anxiously asked Guilford if everything was truly under control, advising him not to act merely out of a sense of duty. The girl next to him agreed and promised to help as much as she could. Gil admitted he was reluctant to take on such responsibility, as a mistake could cause an international scandal. His interlocutor countered, saying he was also a citizen of Feliformia and was willing to help the country if allowed. Mira said with a warm smile that if someone wanted to try her food, it was the duty of any true chef to respond to such a request. The bespectacled man thanked Risa, noting that they were now in her debt. She replied with a friendly smile that it had been a pleasure working with him, and they shook hands. Under the starry sky, the girl admiringly remarked that Risa looked incredibly calm and confident. The two men were getting ready to leave, and the woman promised to meet them at the palace in 3 days. It was decided that he would help out at the palace several times a week, Helena would run the cafe, and Zeke would handle takeout orders. Risa couldn't hide her surprise when she heard this. The palace chefs discussed the upcoming meeting with other chefs. One expressed hope that it would be a useful experience, another emphasized that they weren't coming for fun, although a third was already making plans to have some fun. The girl gazed admiringly at the enormous building, first whispering words of surprise, and then louder praising its grandeur, amazed by the scale and beauty of the palace. The bespectacled man thanked Miss Risa and Mr. Zeke for coming, and the fair-haired youth excitedly remarked that the place was truly worthy of being called a palace. Two uniformed guests thanked the man for the sofa and apologized for arriving in their official attire. He showed them to the staff entrance and offered to escort them to the kitchen, and one of the guests confessed it was his first time setting foot in a real palace. The girl mentioned that she had been to ancient castles, after which the man in glasses turned to Miss Risa with advice, hinting that she might never have heard anything like it before. He explained that the path to becoming a royal chef takes about 10 years, as one must master both knowledge and technique. Although students can sometimes be stubborn, he expressed confidence in the young woman, who listened attentively. The men in uniform dismissed the girl's words, and one of the chefs, with a ponytail, smiled confidently. The other two recognized him and immediately knew who they were dealing with. She showed keen interest and asked about the cafe, listening curiously to the discussion. Miro explained that while Risa and Zeke were at the palace, the cafe was open for takeout. The woman noted with relief that bread was still available, and Miro clarified that the selection remained the same. The man introduced Risa to the palace's head chef, Ian McInnes. She greeted him with slight trepidation, along with her assistant, Zeke, noting the chef's displeased expression as he promised to teach her cooking. He politely offered to leave and asked her to let him know if she needed help. Risa thanked him with a warm smile and agreed. The woman recalled how a high-ranking official personally introduced her to the palace's head chef, emphasizing her status above the others, which caused slight tension among the staff. Kageyama concentrated on refining his knife movements while Silva tended the oven. Elsa and Fina watched them, admiring the spacious kitchen and noting that all the cooks here were men even in this world. The girl politely asked what exactly the man standing at the stove was cooking, but he irritably muttered that it was nothing special and asked why she needed to know. Fina, smiling, clarified that she was simply curious about the outcome, but the cook snapped that it was none of her business, and two other workers stood behind, trying not to interfere. Kageyama noted with displeasure that things weren't moving forward, and Fina added with concern that everything seemed frozen. Then they saw a student washing dishes, and Kageyama quietly remarked that at least someone was busy. Kageyama asked if being a chef meant maturity as a calling, and the boy hesitated, unsure how to answer, while Silva and another listener watched with interest. Suddenly, Kageyama turned around, startled by the man's actions, and demanded an explanation. The others also reacted with surprise and bewilderment at what was happening. The man coldly told the girl that nosy people were welcome here and ordered her to leave. She listened calmly as he explained that this was a sacred place where food for the palace was prepared, and doubted the promises of his superiors. The woman calmly asked him why he cooked, to satisfy his hunger or to assert himself. The two men next to him exchanged glances, not hiding their amusement. Fina flushed with indignation and declared that serving a counterfeit dish to Angel's envoys was a disgrace to Feliformia and made the cook a failure. She emphasized that Risa Claude's cuisine had been officially requested for the banquet. The man shouted and asked if anyone dared to argue with him, but Keith calmly said that it was all great in its own way, causing the opponent to become confused and fall silent. The confident young man told the head chef that if a girl seemed brazen, she should prove her superiority not with words, but with skill. The other two listened attentively, sensing that the tension in the kitchen had reached its breaking point. The man challenged the girl to prove she wasn't just talking, but actually cooking. She confidently accepted the challenge, deciding it would speed things up and victory was already within her grasp. The head chef ordered everyone to begin preparations, and the dark-haired girl awkwardly tried to justify herself by claiming she hadn't intentionally irritated anyone. Meanwhile, the long-haired young man cheerfully waved his hand, greeting everyone. She wondered doubtfully if he was really going to support her strategy, but he announced that the object of the competition would be a fish. Someone nearby suggested it was a black sea bream. The experienced chef skillfully cut up the fish, earning praise for his knife skills, while the waitress watched from the sidelines and decided that the usual cooking method could be followed. Fina asked Zeke to pour water into the pot to make fish head broth, and he agreed without hesitation. The older man watched them curiously, wondering why they were still chopping. She looked up in surprise when he asked what kind of dish they were making. A small figure nearby explained that adding vegetables cuts the fishy smell and enhances the flavor. Fina explained that umami means extracting all the flavor and aroma from ingredients. Miru admitted she'd never done anything like this before, and Silva was asked about his suspicious actions. He calmly replied that he was simply observing his opponent. The girl explained that she was planning to make fishball soup, noting that seafood-based dishes are rare. She demonstrated how to continuously chop the fish finely with a knife until the pieces turned into a soft dough. Fina explained how she mixed chopped vegetables with egg whites, adding flour, salt, and pepper, mixing thoroughly. Someone suggested using a mortar and pestle, and Zeke warned her that the stove flame couldn't be adjusted when she asked him to turn down the heat. Mira struggled to hold the heavy frying pan, explaining that in their world, changing the temperature was as simple as moving the pan. She recalled the convenient stove at the cafe, where she could control the heat, and thought how difficult it was to live without such familiar conveniences. Kageyama advised Fina to use the right stove for extinguishing the fire, and the girl thanked him with slight surprise, feeling genuine support. Kageyama offered to put the fish balls in the refrigerator, and Silva offered to show him the way. Along the way, he asked if he really worked with her, to which Kageyama responded evasively, standing by the open door. He remarked with a kind smile that one should not rely on others for every little thing, gently closing the refrigerator door. Risa remembered that this man had already tried her dishes. Two waiters were discussing their confusion about his intentions, as he had returned to the chef after carefully studying her recipes several days earlier. He noticed the broth was ready and said it needed to be strained and turned to medium heat. The girl asked if she should add the head and was told that the broth would be the base. Carrots and shiitake mushrooms were simmering in a pot when the man raised the temperature. The two girls caught the scent of oil and wondered if he was frying something. The butter began to burn from the intense heat, and one of the cooks ordered it drained and served. Another, perplexed, asked why the dish was being removed so early. The short-haired girl confidently declared that everyone should reap the rewards of their actions, while the dark-haired woman admitted that she was already finding it hard to look at the food. The man behind her merely raised an eyebrow in surprise. Fina cheerfully announced it was time to add the fish balls, demonstrating how to carefully squeeze the mixture from her hand and drop it into the simmering broth. Kageyama and the other man noted the pleasant aroma with interest. As she left with the young man, the girl cheerfully announced that she would add a pinch of sugar as a secret ingredient. The three men, watching them, exchanged surprised and worried glances. The long-haired young man asked if both dishes were finished while the others were still seated at the table. Then, smiling, the young man clapped his hands and announced it was time to sum things up. The older man and young woman enthusiastically agreed, after which two dishes were displayed on the table, McInnes's fried fish and Rice's fishball soup, which became the symbol of their culinary duel. One of the men skeptically asked if there was any fish in the soup, and the girl nervously inquired if she really had to try it. Another participant smiled encouragingly, and the first wished everyone bon appetit. The boy sheepishly apologized for licking the bowl clean, and the girl, blushing with embarrassment, mentally complained that this was happening again, but out loud she said restrainedly that it was okay. Zik served water to refresh the palate and received thanks. He praised the dish for its unusual and pleasant flavor, while another participant confirmed that the result exceeded expectations, savoring every spoonful. Everyone reacted animatedly when Keith finished his dish. Someone thanked him, someone complained that they didn't have time to try it, and a man with gray temples shouted at the noisy crowd, while the girl smiled awkwardly. One of the guests remarked that it was worth exploring other chefs' cuisines and asked if she had been to his cafe. Another man apologized for not introducing himself when the woman, surprised, asked who he was. The man introduced himself as the head chef's assistant, Keith Darringale, and said he was awaiting further instructions. On the contrary, Risa Claude, the manager of the Omusubai Cafe, listened attentively to every word. The dark-haired girl introduced herself as Kirikawa Risa, the manager of the Omusubai Cafe, and officially announced that she would be their cooking instructor from that day on. The man greeted the woman warmly, who bowed deeply in respect. She announced that she would work with them until the end of the royal conference, while the two others watched the scene in silence. The elderly man apologized for his rudeness, but the waitress, with a kind smile, acknowledged her own indiscretion and asked him to accept her apology. The man was surprised, not understanding what exactly she felt guilty about. The young woman addressed him by name, Mr. McInnes. He admitted that they had been overly proud of themselves and had nearly missed a rare opportunity to learn something new and develop independently. The man in the scarf chided his colleague for wanting to invite a woman from the start. The young chef laughed and replied that the main thing was that they had made peace, adding with a smile that good food always brings peace. A confident man praised a young woman for her courage in entering the manly world of the kitchen and asked for her opinion, while a dark-haired woman next to him looked hesitant. Meanwhile, an older chef asked another woman how she liked the dinner she'd just tried. She awkwardly admitted that the taste was terrible and that it was nutritionally unhealthy. The man pointed out that the butter should have been removed from the plate before serving, it was now completely splattered. The older chef criticized the dish as undercooked and with the wrong oil balance, while the woman countered that it was a meuniere. The younger chef asked if butter was supposed to be used. She asked what the other dishes were, and the man explained that it was pol soup and kel salad, adding that pol resembled a pumpkin and kel a fish like salmon, and that the ingredients were already prepared for cooking. The cook confidently declared that he would boil the pumpkin, soaked in salted water, until it became soft. The girl asked in surprise, wondering if he really was just going to boil regular pumpkin. The head chef asked when dinner would be served, and when told it was in 2.5 hours, the determined young woman declared that the dish needed to be redone right away. The others enthusiastically supported the proposal. The man explained the process in detail. You need to squeeze the pol, mash it with a spatula, then rub it through a sieve to achieve a smooth texture, noting that this will take some time. In the kitchen, the man ordered 3 more people to work on the soup, and another cook agreed, setting about preparing the tools. Meanwhile, the others tidied up the work surfaces. Risa watched everyone quickly adapt to the sudden menu changes and thought she was dealing with true professionals. She then clarified the ingredients and salad dressing before agreeing to move on to the next step. She announced that she would make a sample and asked the salad chef to repeat after her, explaining the ingredients and procedure, but suddenly noticed that she didn't have a whisk at hand. Kageyama suggested simply placing the salad in a jar and shaking it. He then arranged the ingredients like petals, placing the kel in the center, added the dressing, and offered the dish for tasting. One of the men enthusiastically remarked on the refreshing acidity, which paired perfectly with the kohl and vegetables. 2 men standing nearby assured him that tasting was their job and encouraged him to try it too. The young chef informed the head chef that the pol preparation was complete and asked if the soup was alright. The chef confirmed the result was excellent, surprising his colleague by adding a little milk. Fina explained that milk is found in nuts and said that the dish was called potage, showing the crushed nut contents over the pan. Kageyama remarked on the dish's flavor with satisfaction, and Silva offered to try it, explaining that milk enhances the flavor without making the soup runny. Miro stood nearby, listening attentively to their discussion. The girl announced that the last course would be the meuniere, and the man happily said he'd been waiting for this very moment. The head chef chuckled at his impatience, and the woman next to him smiled approvingly. The young man apologized to Risa for the delay, explaining that he'd gone to the cafe to pick up an ingredient. She thanked him for his efforts, and someone in the room asked where he'd been. The elderly cook explained to the bewildered young man that the hard block in the box was butter, essential for the meuniere, and that it melted when heated. The senior chef showed the junior how to season the fish with salt and pepper and then roll it in flour. The junior chef remembered that they hadn't seasoned it enough last time. They discussed the process of frying fish, first frying it in oil to seal in the flavor, then finishing it with a lid on over medium heat. Fina explained how to carefully add butter during cooking, then suggested garnishing the dish with herbs and a drizzle of citrus juice left over from the dressing to finish serving. The man noted with slight excitement that the taste and aroma seemed completely new, as if it were a different dish. The young chef laughed and praised the food, teasing the chef about his defeat. The older man told the younger man to stop staring and get to work, and the dark-haired guy pointed out that the chef shouldn't do all the work alone and urged everyone to start preparing dinner. On the second day of the week, they spent almost 3 days between the cafe and the palace, mastering new recipes. For the narrator, this was a particularly intense and labor-intensive time. As for Keith, he remained as friendly as ever and treated her warmer than any of the chefs until someone pointed out that flirting was best saved for later. Zeke greeted everyone with a good morning, noting the internal changes within himself. The man next to him asked about Risa, who was late due to a large cake order, and apologized for distracting him from his work. One man carefully turned the meat with tongs, while another watched, after which he admitted that he considered him very dexterous and would like to learn from him, which caused genuine surprise in the interlocutor. The young man asked if she had left the knightly order to become Lady Risa's apprentice. The girl, with a slight smile, replied that she simply didn't like it when men stared at her too closely. One self-assured man declared that he had many girlfriends, mostly fans of the cafe, while another wondered why a promising knight had traded service for the kitchen, arguing about loyalty and duty. He calmly explained that he had not left because of dissatisfaction or money, adding that her words belittled the cook's work. Kageyama calmly remarked that people have strange tastes, and Silva asked with a slight grin if he was serious. She hurried into the room, apologizing for being late and asking if everything was okay, looking around at those gathered. A woman entered the room and saw two men face to face. One apologized for the inspection and laughed, turning the tension into humor, while she watched the scene in amazement. Keith was cooking with a serious expression when the long-haired man said he couldn't stand people who treated cooking as a pastime, but was relieved to see that Keith was serious about his work. Keith apologized, but the head chef abruptly interrupted, ordering him to concentrate or leave. He quickly promised to obey. The girl asked Zeke what had happened, but he calmly replied that it was nothing important. The older man watched them with a thoughtful expression while the other two walked past the bakery counter in the background. He stated firmly that he was not going to lose to that guy, and his gaze was full of firm determination. She mused that Chief McInnes had said the argument was trivial, watching the two men converse earnestly, the others standing behind her as she concentrated on reading the document. The dark-haired man doubted the other man was truly Mistress Risa's apprentice and offered to learn his knife skills. The blonde man, whisk in hand, criticized the whipped cream for being too thick and demanded it be redone. An argument about cooking broke out between them. One claimed that it was the first time he was making dessert, while the other replied that he was just learning and, instead of complaining, was trying to improve. The man angrily ordered them both to stop just as they were about to lock eyes. The woman remarked that she rarely saw the usually calm Zeke so agitated, while the other nervously noted that competition wasn't so bad, even if they were constantly arguing. Fina cheerfully said that she would go into the next room to plan the menu for the next week, and Kageyama approved, and, holding the bowl, mentally resolved not to lose at any cost. Silva noted that the atmosphere in the kitchen was inspiring, turning to Keita, who held a bowl and listened while work bustled around him. The girl struggled to create a new menu, worrying about how to serve the royal guests different dishes every day, irritated by the repetition, while the man watched her efforts and quietly called out her name. He explained that the menu was usually created by the head chef, and sometimes even by himself, and without any specific rules everything was decided on the spot, based on the ingredients available. The girl questioned whether it was possible to work that way. A young man standing by a bookshelf informed the seated girl that even in the palace they were now talking about how much the cuisine had improved, which was ruining their reputation. She quietly apologized, feeling guilty. Kageyama smiled softly, and Lena, a little embarrassed, admitted she was simply doing the best she could. Silva joked that the reputation thing was true, diffusing the tension. The man asked the girl where she was from, noting her black hair, dark eyes, and unusual facial features. She uttered a short, surprised "huh?" He asked where she had learned to cook like that, then lightly touched the recipe and turned to Risa, who looked up with a thoughtful expression. A young man in a vest entered the room, announcing that the head chef had summoned him. Meanwhile, the two men were arguing, one suspecting it was all deliberate, while the other, surprised, asked what he meant. The serious man ordered the young man to hurry back, causing him to become confused, and the two nearby whispered anxiously. Soon, 3 people entered the room, loudly announcing their arrival. The nobleman recognized Risa and addressed her by name, after which she introduced him to the head chef, who smiled politely and greeted the guest. Gil was intercepted by the prince, who angrily demanded to know what he was doing with his daughter. He, confused, defended himself, saying he simply wanted to see the famous chef he'd heard so much about. The woman stated with dignity that her son now ruled in her stead, and the young man introduced himself as Edgar Ashling Ferris Feliformia, the crown prince, and apologized for the sudden visit. Kageyama politely apologized for the interruption and asked permission to continue, while the others mentally exclaimed that this was impossible, and someone quietly suggested sending the princess elsewhere. The man sternly asked Guilford what he was displeased with, reminding him of his pride in his daughter. The girl listened silently, while Guilford nervously denied any intention of marrying Rhys, fearing that his words might be misunderstood in front of the prince. Keita explained that his mother had said the food in the palace had become tastier thanks to Lady Risa, so he wanted to talk to her. Silva, embarrassed, suggested changing the subject. Two men in formal uniform walked along the corridor of the palace, noticing that both the officials and the knights had become more cheerful, and that everyone was looking forward to dinner. The young man gratefully thanked his temporary chef, noting his high hopes for the royal banquet. The girl excitedly asked him not to bow and simply acknowledge her efforts. He smiled warmly and asked for the hamburger steak to be cooked again. She praised his sincerity and promised to try, but he added that he had one more request, prompting her to ask what it was. Miru admitted that she remembered the dish for a long time, but she showed that the meat was undercooked inside by carefully cutting into a piece. A waitress noticed that the dish looked cooked on the outside, but tasted terrible. The waitress explained that this happens when the temperature isn't controlled and automatically apologized. The woman expressed hope to perfect the recipe to please the royal family. The men agreed, and she smiled, recalling how difficult it had been to prepare. When a neighbor asked what had happened, she replied that she was simply remembering all the hassle. The young man confirmed that His Highness loved hamburger steaks and promised to include the dish on the menu. The scene gave way to a tranquil view of the building under a cloudy sky. The man wondered why the prince wanted to meet and realized he wanted to express his gratitude and make a request. The others whispered about how friendly the air had seemed after the meeting. Kageyama asked if the food was being cooked properly, and the girl replied that everything was going fine and he should wait 10 minutes. At that moment, there was a knock, and she invited him in, leaving him wondering who might be coming on their day off. The older man apologized for the intrusion, and the young man was surprised to recognize him as the head chef, wondering why he had come. The waitress politely pointed him to a break room on the second floor where he could change. She explained that he himself had asked to be trained on the weekend before the banquet, not out of pride, but to master the skills of the court chef of California. The blonde man apologized and said that before an important event, it was not the time for personal arguments, adding that it was the desire not to lose that gave people strength. The dark-haired girl replied that there was nothing wrong with that. Fina cheerfully brought out a tray of freshly baked goods and asked Zeke if they looked perfect. Mira calmed the young man with gentle confidence, saying that he was her best student and was second to no one in baking experience, while freshly baked cakes steamed nearby. The older man remarked that the food smelled delicious. The girl happily explained that Zeke had prepared the delicacies, and the man, smiling, said he was looking forward to their lesson. She confidently declared that everything would definitely work out for them at the banquet, and the older man firmly agreed, while the camera showed a quiet building under an overcast sky. Fina explained that they were making millefeuille for the banquet, and it was her first time baking such a large quantity at once. Helena was praised for her assistance, and the mentor expressed admiration for the scale of the task. The girl wondered what a real banquet was like, imagining it as a majestic spectacle. The man explained that today was an international meeting of kings and prime ministers, where a full multi-course meal was expected, which greatly surprised her. Reset explained in detail the multi-course menu, including soup, fish, sorbet, meat, dessert, and tea. The others were amazed by the variety, and a colleague added that a ball featuring foreign nobles would be held the following day. After 2 months of working as a mentor, the girl with short hair encouraged another, who wrapped the products with a grateful smile, and they worked together on the noisy street. The day of the International Royal Conference arrived. A carriage moved down the crowded street, and someone remarked that they had to prepare 8 courses for 40 guests. The bearded man called for everyone to focus, and the team responded unanimously, preparing for the big test in the tiled room. Everyone in the kitchen was working at the utmost intensity, knowing the country's reputation depended on their dishes, so there could be no mistakes. A nearby girl sensed an unusual commotion in the air. The young woman explained that appetizers were the easiest to prepare, and instructed me to peel shrimp, bake them in the oven, and garnish them with green stalks similar to asparagus, under a sauce of egg yolk and butter. Someone was frying mushrooms in a pan, and next to them it was specified that they should be mixed with vegetables to make a salad with a seafood flavor. The man asked for some space, explaining that he couldn't continue otherwise. The girl with the bow wondered where to place the dishes, noting that there were no problems with the cooking, but perhaps the order had been mixed up. The man said that it was the lack of space that was the problem, and then the elder ordered the maids to be called immediately so that they could take the first snacks to the pantry, promising that space would be freed up. The young woman apologized to the supervisor, but he insisted he was to blame for the team's unrest and would take all the blame. She tried to remain calm, though she felt lost in the bustle that resembled a cafe. Two maids politely offered to take the dishes to the pantry, then one asked if they should start with these plates, and the man, smiling, agreed. A young chef tearfully apologized after being called incompetent for ruining a dish. The narrator noted that the court chefs prepare it so often that such mistakes are unforgivable. The girl admitted she'd added too many croutons, ruining the soup. The man explained that they'd run out of croutons, and the other girl thoughtfully remarked that that was her mistake. Kageyama asked how many plates they needed, and Fina confidently replied that they could make 5 right away. He then ordered Lena to heat the frying pan with oil and asked Mira to bring some bread. Fina calmly toasted the bread cubes, thinking she wouldn't let their efforts go to waste. She decided that if anyone made a mistake, she'd simply back them up, finding solace in the simplicity of the task. Mira finished the last portion of bread, and Fina thanked her, calling her a savior for the timely croutons. Kageyama explained that the bread they were using belonged to Paul, the court supplier. The team then began preparing the main courses, starting with frying the fish, which would be served with tartar sauce. The young man and the head chef deftly cut up the fish, impressing the girl with their speed and coordination. She noted with respect that she was standing before the head chef himself and Keith. The head chef assigned Keith to handle the meat dish, while he himself promised to fillet the fish one by one and prepare the sauce. A young assistant nearby quietly agreed. The young woman offered to help, and the old man accepted with gratitude, but warned that their main enemy now was time, emphasizing the importance of keeping the food warm but not cold. One of the men jokingly admitted that he never sought honors, he only wanted the rulers to forget about business, even if only for a moment, and enjoy the taste of food. The others at the table listened with slight smiles. The team worked in unison, some were happy to be in Feliformia, while others quietly complained that it would be nice if their colleagues were a little more attentive. He thought of McInnes and thought about how chefs serve dishes seasoned with emotion, sincerely hoping that the feelings put into the food will reach those who taste it. The young woman reported that all preparations were complete and the food had been placed in the refrigerator. Then the head chef suggested moving on to the next main course. The chef announced he was starting to prepare the sauce, and another chef ordered everyone except Keita's team to begin glazing. She remembered that the main meat dish was Prince Edgar's favorite hamburger steak. The head chef suggested serving the cutlets hot, and the girl agreed, deciding to fry them all at once. She was touched by the result of her long training being realized before her eyes, while the two young men watched the process attentively. The instructions described how to prepare the dish: first, fry over high heat until golden brown, then cover and cook until done, and finally remove from the stove and add the sauce. One of the characters watched this with rapt attention. The kitchen discussed how to manage 6 stoves, alternating heat levels, and decided to serve sorbet immediately after the fried fish to maintain the perfect rhythm of serving dishes. The older man assigned Risa to prepare desserts with Seek. The blonde reminded her that it was time to work on the millefeuille layers, which surprised her. Time was running out. She steeled herself, determined to give it her all, since everyone was counting on her. The description explained that millefeuille was a multi-layered cake with cream and toppings. A girl with a flower hairpin remarked that their cafe was clearly expanding, and a man, opening the door, listened to a storyteller remark that due to time constraints, Risa had never been able to teach the court chefs how to make it. A waitress in uniform said that here, unlike in a cafe, you couldn't see the customers' faces. A colleague with braided hair agreed, adding that she'd like to take a peek inside, while the other two remarked admiringly on the royal guest's graceful manners. Miru, arriving late, nervously approached the master while he and another man watched anxiously. At that moment, Fina, noticing something was wrong, abruptly rushed forward, shocked by what was happening. Mira desperately hoped that the broken crackers could be saved, scolding herself for her clumsiness and agonizing over what to do next. Miru admitted that she was to blame due to carelessness, but the girl in the maid's uniform reassured her, saying no one could have known about the basement. The others also apologized for their mistake. The older man insisted the guests had come for a special dessert, and without it, the entire banquet would be meaningless. The young woman agreed with Keith, explaining that the key element, the crispy crust, couldn't be remade in time. After so many successes, she despairingly admitted that because of her, everyone's efforts would be wasted, clutching the tray of food in her hands, which was visibly shaking. One of the men thanked Risa, noting that they had learned a lot from her and expressed appreciation for her responsibility and leadership. Someone loudly ordered the guests to stop standing around and move on, reminding them that the banquet wasn't over yet. The young woman listened calmly, her expression focused. The employees anxiously approached the head chef, explaining that the situation was serious. One of the men insisted that they tell Ms. Risa everything, only she could intervene and save him from imminent dismissal. The young man admitted he felt a debt to his mentor and didn't want their relationship to end badly. The boss, standing with his back to him, laughed and remarked that he still had ways to make his student nervous. In the kitchen, the man apologized for keeping the woman waiting. She gently replied that it was no big deal and acknowledged her own carelessness as they stood at the counter, surrounded by dishes and kitchen utensils. He said with regret that she had not managed to demonstrate her skills, and she hesitantly suggested replacing the impossible millefeuille with something else, without knowing what exactly. The man acknowledged that the choice of ingredients was limited, but firmly stated that it was better to do something than to give up, expressing his determination to create the dish no matter what. The girl fell silent in surprise, lost in thought, and he, confused, didn't know where to start, but inside he felt an insistent desire to try to cook at least something from what was left. The girl suggested making sorbet, and the two guys started arguing about desserts, choosing between strawberries with cream, a tart, or a pancake, but ultimately agreed that there would only be time for the chilled version. Kageyama urgently ordered them to wait, but Fina insisted on changing the serving order, deciding to bring out the hamburger steaks first, explaining that this was the only possible option, even though the plan was for sorbet to come after the fish. The older man apologized to Risa, saying there was no time to explain. A boy nearby asked if she had come up with anything, and she replied that this was her first time cooking in this world, but she saw it as a chance to prove herself. She suggested frying steaks instead of sorbet and taking on dessert herself, which surprised the head chef and made the young man wonder if she had really found a brilliant solution. The man explained that hamburger steaks were the prince's favorite dish, and the woman pointed out that the frying pan only fits 4 patties. He then reminded her that the number of stovetops was limited. She confidently said they could handle it, as they all had plenty of experience. The men responded to the boss with determination, promising to do everything possible. One of them demanded to see the results of the training and ordered immediate action. The response was a short yes, and neatly arranged plates with prepared dishes were shown in the background. 2 maids noticed the change in presentation and asked in surprise if the plan had been changed. The baker hesitantly admitted that it had and agreed to bring out the hamburger steaks. The team, tired but satisfied, realized they'd made it. One of them encouraged the others to make the final push. Weariness, relief, and determination to see it through were palpable in the air. The girl explained to the older man that after talking with Zeke, she noticed that it was possible to make it using only a portion of the remaining ingredients shown on the table, adding that now only dessert remained. Fina began by explaining the first step, pouring a sauce made from matcha and sugar over the base. The old man didn't understand and asked if she was talking about the juice or the glasses, but she quickly clarified her meaning. Kageyama noted that there was no time to boil the ingredients, so they had to thoroughly mash them with forks. Another chef expressed concern that the stoves had already been turned off. Fina calmly broke the cake into small pieces, surprising the others, who asked her not to act so hastily. She calmly continued explaining the next step. Risa insisted on covering the dessert with custard and creating a crispy crust on top of the sauce, while the guy next to her worriedly assured her that everything was fine, although he privately thought she had completely lost her mind. The older man began to explain the process of making the dessert, mentioning pieces of mechi fruit, custard, and sorbet, while the younger man listened with interest, amazed by the many added ingredients. The 3 men looked at the finished delicacy with admiration, and one of them solemnly announced that the mechi parfait with cream was finished, and their faces reflected a mixture of surprise and anticipation. Kageyama noted the straightness of the layers and the beautiful combination of yellow and red hues, eagerly wanting to try it. Another suggested admiring it a bit longer, and a third remarked that the dessert was more like a sundae. The girl suggested that she and Zeke do the garnishing and asked everyone to help fill the glasses. The men enthusiastically agreed, thrilled to be part of the final preparations. One of them sampled the dish, remarking on its refreshing flavor and appealing appearance, adding that it would go perfectly with the meat and would delight the guests. Another man nearby was indignant that it was his turn next. The older man asked if the younger man had calmed down, and the younger man, with a slight smile, thought that the prospect of a promotion to chief was slipping away. The older man, chuckling, called him an ungrateful student. Keita carefully rolled a pancake while the others cooked and washed the dishes. The kitchen was bustling with activity, everyone focused on their tasks. After the parfait, the result of a joint effort, was served. 2 girls in maid uniforms began preparing tea for the hall, and one thanked the other, despite the fact that not everything was going according to plan. The girl admitted she'd waited a whole hour to hear the result, and he calmly replied that it was finally over. Then the scene shifted to a view of a castle at night. The curtain had fallen on the first day of the International Royal Conference, but new work lay ahead.